I want to welcome you to the Retro Rogues Live. Please pay attention to our warning graphic. It states that the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. I want to welcome you to the show. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts. For nearly the last 30 years, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. I'm not sure how many people will be watching tonight, but for those of you that need some escapism from everything that's going on, a distraction from all the stuff that's happening all over the world, we are here for you. Anyhow, I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. Eric, please tell the folks hopefully watching and listening at home some of the fun things that you have done as a creative professional.
Yes, everyone. I am Eric Alexander, also known as Base God 14. That's Base God 14, BASSGOD 14. That's not Bass God, that's Base God, like a bass guitar. And I am the Chief Financial Officer of Bad Bob Productions, which is a small production company located in Arizona. And I am also the associate producer of the feature film Occupants, which features Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo and is currently streaming for free on Tubi.
Very cool. So I want to acknowledge my mom, who just said, "Hi, guys." Hi, Mom. Glad to have you here.
Hey,
Mom. Real quick, we're going to start off with our main topic. If we're good to go, Eric, let's just go ahead and get into talking about the latest episode of the Disney Gallery Star Wars show about the Mandalorian. And this one was all about practical effects, which I think it was actually titled Practical, correct?
Yes, that is correct. It was pretty practical, right?
Pretty practical. So we'll start off just talking about general overall impressions. I found this episode to be very, very interesting. I was surprised at some of the things that, kind of like Nine Numb from the original movies from Return of the Jedi. I didn't realize that was actually like. Now I'm about to say something I know it's not incorrect. Eric, do you remember what was it? Nine Numb? Wasn't that a puppet or a dude in a suit?
It was both, I believe.
It was okay.
Similar. That was kind of similar to what they did with Quill.
That's what I was going to say. I was surprised.
Same with Akbar, I believe. Akbar and was also done in a similar fashion, if I remember correctly.
I was just surprised to see that, because for some reason when they showed some of the behind the scenes stuff where he's on the back of the creature, I kept thinking he was probably just a puppet. So I was surprised that, that it was a lady in a suit with an animatronic mask on. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And that was just one of the amazing things that we saw in this particular episode. This one and the last one, where they talked a lot about their crazy video wall that they kept referring to, the volume or whatever. These are the ones I was most curious about, because I wanted to see what they were really doing with the show and how they were crafting it, how they were creating it. There was a lot of really cool stuff they did actually with the child, or Baby Yoda, as some people may know him. It was really interesting to actually see the puppet and actually see them kind of doing stuff with it and seeing how that they would, kind of bring it to life, and actually getting a chance to see some of the people who actually work on the puppet, who actually do bring it to life. I found this episode to be really, really intriguing. And to be honest, I've been enjoying this series on Disney Plus overall. But I'd have to say this one and the last one are the two that I felt like I found the most interesting. They did spend a little bit of time talking about actually also doing some of the how they were shooting the Raven Crest, the ship, and then talking about that originally they were just going to have a couple of what do they call that, where they've got the computer assisted, where they replicate the camera movements. I can't remember what it's called now. Motion control. They wanted to have a couple of shots, kind of old school, just to have in the show, so they could say that they'd shot the Raven Crest, the Mandalorian ship, kind of the same way that they did a lot of the classic Star Wars ships, where you're talking about the original A New Hope, and you're talking about, the Millennium Falcon, you're talking about, obviously the X-Wings and the TIE Fighters. And they wanted a shot that they could say, we shot this just like the others. And they did talk too that a lot of the research they were doing, and apparently it was one of the guys who worked on the effects for the film. He talked about how, as sort of, I guess, just a passion project or for fun, he had actually been collecting a lot of the actual motion controlled actual shots from the various films into some kind of a sample reel or something they could look at. And it caused him to actually go back and actually reference some of the original films and some of the war footage that George Lucas had used to cut together kind of like a temp to help the visual effects guys understand what the timing needed to be for how fast the X-Wings would move and how fast the TIE fighters would move, and kind of a way to approach the space battle so that it felt grounded and real. And all that stuff was terribly, terribly interesting. So, but I definitely say this episode and the last episode for me are definitely the highlights so far, because I really enjoyed seeing all the cool stuff that they did. So my overall impression with this episode was this was a lot of fun. What did you think, Eric?
Well, what I really liked was how well the previous episode led into this one. The previous episode being technology. And as we've talked a lot about how fascinated we were about the entire video wall that they were using, the back screen technology that they were using. But what's really interesting is in the previous episode, they showed a little bit of how, even though they were using all this projection screen technology, that it also incorporated the camera, where basically the camera, as the camera moved, the background would change, because they were incorporating video game technology with the camera, so that when the camera moves, the background moves appropriately and all that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of like, almost like a live green screen on steroids is one way you could look at it. But that's not exactly what they did. They also had a lot of practical effects. And of course, that's what this episode is all about. They had practical sets, real things for the actors to interact with. So it's very much a hybrid filming technique. And so in this episode, we got to see the other half of that. Like literally, for instance, they mentioned in the previous episode that the Mandalorian ship, only half of it actually exists in real life in terms of on the actual set. It actually goes all the way up to the roof, and then the roof actually is also a projection screen, and it fills up the rest of the ship. So but there is that part of the ship that's actually the set. And so it was interesting in this episode where they really kind of emphasized a lot of these practical effects that they've been using. In particular, they really emphasized the puppetry, which, I'm a big fan of puppetry. I'm a big fan of the Muppets and things like that. Obviously, with Star Wars, going back to Yoda, the original Yoda, Empire Strikes Back, operated by the legendary Frank Oz, who obviously was very much involved with Jim Henson and the Jim Henson Company. So kind of seeing them kind of get back to those roots was really, really interesting to me. Like, I didn't understand how Quill was done exactly. I just kind of assumed that it was a man of small stature in a suit. And that I kind of wondered how the mouth movement and everything worked. I kind of almost assumed that they were using a lot of CGI. And that was not the case. It was fascinating to me to see that this is a person in a suit, but the face is essentially a puppet in and of itself that other people are operating. And it was interesting to see the actor, the person that's actually in the suit, who is a female, basically talking about incorporating all that. And then, of course, on top of that, it's Nick Nolte's voice. So there's even that element of it as well. But they're basically, she was mentioning how she had to do things like give little hand signals to help with like the dialogue and everything, because basically somebody else is operating her mouth while she's trying to act. And I find that fascinating because, so often in Hollywood and in the filmmaking process in general, there's this very dismissive attitude of the person in the suit. You see that a lot with Hollywood actors and their egos and things like that. It's like, oh, well, that's just the person in the suit, who cares? And in this particular instance, you could really see, well, this is why you should care, because to me, it's just amazing that they're able to do that, because you have somebody completely different, basically, that's, not in the camera frame at all, that's off to the side, wherever they are, controlling the mechanisms in the face, and you have an actor in the suit that's having to kind of, act with the actors, live within the studio, but they're not able to control the mechanism of even their own mouth. It's fascinating to me. It's just amazing to me that they're able to incorporate all those things together and get something that looks so seamless to me. That ends up looking so good. And I found that just really, really, really interesting, because I didn't realize that that's what they did. I didn't realize that was literally a prosthetic with an animatronic inside that was fully functioning and could actually move, and the lips could move, the mouth could move, the eyes could move, and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't the actor that was operating that stuff. It's these people basically off to the side that are doing the puppetry. I found that really, really fascinating. I was actually really surprised about that. Again, I do think that they use a similar technique with Akbar. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe that there was a similar process, because I remember watching some of those behind the scenes films regarding the Return of the Jedi and the original Star Wars trilogy. And as I recall, that's Akbar was, in some scenes he would be a guy in a suit, and then other scenes it was a puppet. You know what I mean? That they basically operated so that they could get all those different, unique movements and everything like that with the eyes and the mouth and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, in wider scenes, it would be a guy in a suit, and they would kind of go back and forth. In this case with Quill, it's all incorporated there. The face, is actually still animatronic. And again, to me, that just blows me away, because to me, it seems like the timing and everybody has to be so in sync to make that work, especially while there's a director, in the studio actually directing the other live actors and telling them what to do in real time, and they're having to film all that. I just found that incredibly fascinating, and didn't realize that was even possible, because that takes an immense amount of coordination when you really think about it.
Yeah, I found it really, really, really cool, and I really enjoyed getting to see all of that. And I was very stunned to find out that Quill, the man in the suit, turned out to be a wool man in the suit for Quill. It was really interesting. And I've always been curious about a lot of that process and how they do a lot of that. And I'd love to one day be involved with something where they do all that kind of stuff. I think that'd be kind of fun. You know what I mean? To see a character brought to life like that. And it's interesting too, because I have a lot of hope. I'm going to talk about independent film here for just a half a second. I have a lot of hope for all the amazing things that hopefully independent filmmakers will be able to do soon. Hopefully kind of seeing the way, for example, if you're an independent filmmaker, I think this is interesting to see what they're doing and how they're using technology with The Mandalorian in this particular series. Not because you're going to have the resources to do the exact same thing, but it might spark an idea, or it might lead you down a different path. I mean, we can't do that, but we could do something like this. It'd be interesting. What it brings to mind is I'm a member of the Disney film, The Black Hole. Is a fascination of mine. I've loved that film since I was a kid. And there was a gentleman who actually just finished, I think he just finished, or he's almost finished, actually building a Vincent, an actual 1-to-1 scale Vincent prop.
That's cool.
And he's been 3D printing some of it, building components of some of it, and kind of slowly cobbling it and putting it together. And watching all their stuff they're doing with the animatronics and stuff, I was like, wow, it'd be cool. You could have a robot like that on set and maybe actually make it work. And I just find all this stuff really, really interesting. So I really, really enjoyed this particular episode. I thought it was really cool. Is there anything?
Well, one of the interesting things you kind of touched on, you were talking about with independent filmmakers and things that they might be able to take away from this, which I think there's a lot you could actually take away from it. But there was one thing that I found really interesting, which is that they talked about the fact that they actually did make a miniature of the Mandalorian ship, but it was almost hardly used. It was really made more than anything for Favreau and Filoni to kind of geek out. They wanted to geek out a little bit and have something practical. And they said they justified it in the budget by saying that they needed it for like the, to show the lighting, so they get the lighting right and things like that. And they said they ended up actually using it for a couple of shots in the television show, because primarily it's CGI. That particular ship is CGI within the actual within the show. But there are several shots where they did use the miniature, and they had the visual effects person as part of the roundtable who built it and had the expertise to do that. And he mentioned how it had been a while since he'd actually built a miniature, because they're way more expensive than the CGI, which I found really interesting. It's like, so that's why you don't see miniatures as much anymore, apparently, is because they're actually much more expensive to construct than to just do it in CGI. So it's kind of becoming, he kind of implied it's becoming kind of a dying art form. This is something that he knows how to do because he's been in the industry for a long time, but he hasn't done it in a while. And so it was kind of fun for him to actually make one. And like I said, it was very obvious that, Favreau kind of had this done because he just kind of wanted one. You know what I mean? Like, he even said, like, he kind of implied that he takes pieces of the set and he gets to take a lot of this stuff, you know what I mean? Because he's the showrunner, he's the director. It has to go somewhere, you know what I mean? And they don't really put stuff in the vault anymore. So he was basically kind of implying that he plans to take it home. You know what I mean? That's the whole reason they had the thing made in the first place. But I found it really interesting that's apparently an issue now, is that miniatures aren't being made as much anymore because they're just not cost effective, which I thought was really, really kind of interesting. And in some ways a little bit sad, because you wonder how long is it going to be before that particular craft is lost. You know what I mean? This guy knew how to do it because he's been in the business for a long time. And, he learned from, people in Lucasfilm how to do this kind of stuff. And he was the one that was doing the archive that you mentioned, where he was taking, and what he was doing was he was taking shots from the original trilogy, and he was cataloging them, specifically of the ships. And then he was remodeling them with CGI, and he was trying to do frame by frame, like frame by frame accurate representations of, like, say, a Star Destroyer, but in CGI, which I also thought was interesting. And then he was trying to see what he could do to push it and maybe make the CGI, quote unquote, better. And that got them into a really fascinating discussion where they talked about the sort of visual aesthetic of the original Star Wars films, and how much of that was deliberate and how much of that was just based on the technology they had at the time, and actually even like mistakes, what I mean, that were basically, it was just because they didn't have the money or they didn't have the technology. Like, for instance, they talked about the way that a lot of these starships were shot in the original trilogy. It was based on the size of the model, and it was based on the camera technology at the time. And certain shots simply could not be done because the model was too big and the camera could only go so far. And then eventually they had to make smaller models, but they couldn't do that in the first film because they didn't have the budget. And they really got into it, which I thought was really fascinating. I mentioned this before, that you really feel with Favreau and Filoni that the rumors are very, very true, that these guys are absolutely like George Lucas loyalists. And they're like George Lucas fanatics. They are fans themselves. You can really tell that when you see this series, in particular in this episode, because they really get into it. And it's kind of funny. I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it. As long as she's there, Kathleen Kennedy looks so out of place and so awkward in those roundtable discussions when she's involved. When she's like involved, she doesn't contribute like anything. You know what I mean? When she's at the table, and it's just funny to see Favreau and Filoni like just go back and forth about, yeah, George did this and George did that. You know what I mean? And we want to do it like this. We want to do. Well, they mentioned what it's Salacious Crumb, the little creature that's with Jabba the Hutt, that's laughing all the time, and of course he gets cooked, Mandalorian, or at least not him, right, but one of his species. And they got the guy that actually designed him and constructed him for Return of the Jedi and brought him back just to do that, which I think is, just shows you, their mentality and the loyalty that they have, that they brought him back, this person that actually worked on Return of the Jedi just to do that, just to recreate that one. I mean, that scene is almost like a throwaway. That scene is like it's an Easter egg. You know what I mean? That's basically all that scene is. And the fact that they brought back the actual guy to recreate that particular puppet and operate that puppet and everything like that, to me is like, yeah, these guys are obviously fans. I mean, they really get it. They are definitely like old school George Lucas loyalists, and you can tell. I think that's in a lot of ways, even without knowing that, that's why the show has resonated so well with really like old school hardcore Star Wars fans, is because the guys running it really are old school hardcore Star Wars fans, and they really know their stuff. You touched on it too when we were talking about the ship, and this was also when they were talking about the miniature and some of that kind of stuff. They talked about how George Lucas was heavily influenced by the film The Battle of Britain. And in that film, The Battle of Britain, was filmed at a time where they weren't, they decided not to use miniatures, and they'd use real aerial footage. And I've kind of talked about this before too on previous episodes, about how George Lucas based the fighter combat, like the attack on the Death Star, that is based on like World War II fighter pilots, and specifically Favreau and Filoni were talking about. He based it on this film, The Battle of Britain, that was all filmed, in the air with real planes. This was actual real aerial photography with, World War II vintage planes done, live, in the air. And that's what influenced George Lucas and the style that he made the combat. That's why it feels so authentic. And that's also why I would say the Disney Wars stuff, a lot of it feels so hollow, because I think a lot of the Disney Wars stuff, particularly in the trilogy, the Disney War trilogy, it feels very hollow because instead of it feeling like it's based on real combat, actual fighter combat, it's based on Star Wars. And it becomes like, just that one step removed, and it just becomes so much less believable. And it's just so interesting to see, because I didn't know that. I didn't know that specifically George Lucas based the combat on that movie, The Battle of Britain. And it just makes you realize, well, that's why it's so good. It's because back then they didn't have CGI, and they didn't use miniatures in this particular movie. They used real vintage World War II fighter planes, and they filmed them in the air. And that's what he based this fictional space combat on. And that's why it's so good. That's why it's so good. That's why it's so authentic. That's why it still rings true today, because it's based on something that actually was, an actual reality, as opposed to just, silliness, where it's based on fictional stuff. And hey, Bobby, it's good to see you. He says, such a big difference when the creators are fans of the material. Cough, cough, Picard. Oh, yes, Bobby Picard. But, Kurtzman's a fan. He's a fan now, even though he's on record as saying he was never a Star Trek fan. He's a Star Wars fan, but now he's a fan.
Well, I think I've kind of said my piece on this episode. I really, really enjoyed it. And I did think that was interesting because I didn't think that. I was curious to see if they would talk about the ships in this particular episode, or if they would get further into that in another episode. So I did like all that stuff that they talked about it, and it was interesting too. I always like where they do that, where they do wax poetic and they talk about what they were doing in the original Star Wars films and what they were trying to achieve, or what they were looking at, or what they were inspired by. That's always very interesting to know. Because I'd always seen and known that Lucas had, actually used actual, dogfight footage, and cut that together in sort of like a temp so that the effects guys would understand what they needed to do, in order to bring the effects shots across. But it was still a bit of a surprise to learn where it actually came from. I thought that was really interesting. So very cool.
they're like Star Wars historians because they weren't there, that's what I think I find fascinating as well. And Filoni, of course, talked about the institutional knowledge at Lucasfilm, which is immense, and Industrial Light and Magic and everything like that. Because even though not all the same people are obviously there, and obviously not all the same people are working on these projects, the institutional knowledge is there because the guys that are there, they learned from the guys that were doing, say, the prequels, you know what I mean? And then the prequel guys learned from the guys who did the original trilogy. And so there's incredible continuity at Lucasfilm. And you can see, Filoni, being someone who's been at Lucasfilm longer than Favreau, really talking about that and kind of, you can just tell these guys really know the history of this entire process, and they really appreciate it. They really ingest it, and they really try to use it. One thing we didn't really talk about is the Baby Yoda. This is the episode that they really got into Baby Yoda, and wow, that puppet is amazing, absolutely amazing, and just seeing them talking about it and seeing the actors talking about it, and how cool it was for them, where they said that they almost felt, even on the set, like Baby Yoda was just stealing the show, because everybody was just like, they got so immersed into the puppet. You know what I mean? Like the puppet sort of became like a real person for them. There's some pretty funny stories about that, where they talk about the actor that played the Imperial officer, that he just got so invested into Baby Yoda, and was even like chastising the director and the crew and everything like that about, hey, you got to really get into this. You know what I mean? Because he was saying, like, he wasn't talking to the puppeteers, he was talking to the puppet. You know what I mean? So he was really, which by the way also reminds me of what comes across with like the Muppets, because you see that with the Muppets. Obviously, when actors interact with the Muppets, they interact with Kermit. They don't interact with Jim Henson. You know what I mean? You can see that. You know what I mean? So that technique, I think, is very tried and true. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, and it sells the scene so much more.
No, yeah, and I did find it was. I thought it was very humorous there, telling that story about Werner Herzog and how he wanted them to commit to the puppet, and getting very yeah. So I wish they could show us. I wish someone had shot some behind the scenes footage, because I'd love to see him telling them, "You have to commit to the puppet." Like, I would love to see that.
that would be really funny, and it's probably there, but they definitely select. They kind of pick and choose what it is that they're going to put in there. You know what I mean? There is some polish, involved with this, because they show a lot of the finished scenes. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of like, I've seen the finished scenes. I really don't need to see that again. I would like to see, the process a little bit more. Like, they even mentioned that they did some stop motion. They did some stop motion with the creatures from the Battle for Endor that they actually put in, the ones that they ride around on. Right, I wish I could remember what they're called. But those are actually from the Battle of Endor. They're actually from the one of the Ewok specials. And originally they were stop motion. So there's actually a shot that they did in stop motion, and they just talked about it. They didn't really show the process, but I was like fascinated by that they actually incorporated stop motion, which like today is like, unless it's like, Wallace and Gromit, it's like right. Dead. You know what I mean? It's like, that's like the only place you see it. We have a comment from Anthony, YouTube fan. He says, "Hi guys, I have to say, seeing the ships of the Mandalorian be comprised of models, almost actual size, and CGI was the best of all worlds in Star Wars. Filoni and Favreau are the future." And Anthony, I hope you are correct. There's all sorts of rumors about a power struggle going on right now with Kennedy versus Favreau, about who's going to be in charge of Lucasfilm creatively. There's all sorts of rumors that, and you can see it in the body language. You can just so see it in the body language. Favreau sits right next to Filoni, and they're always talking to each other like they're best friends. And Kathleen Kennedy is just kind of off to the side, and there's a clear space between them. And Favreau very rarely looks at Kathleen Kennedy when she's talking. I mean, it's the body language is just there. And I'm surprised more people haven't commented on that, because I just see it like just so obvious that there's a chasm between the two of them, I think, creatively. That's the way I interpret it.
No, and I thoroughly enjoyed seeing all the practical stuff too. I just thought it was just amazing. And I would have to, I'm going to chime in and agree with what Anthony, YouTube fan, says. And I mean, I think that that's true. I do think that what Filoni and what Favreau are doing, is the future for Star Wars. What they've done with The Mandalorian is amazing. And it's captured the imagination of not just old school Star Wars fans, but even some of the new Star Wars fans. It's living in that place where it's doing, ideally, hopefully, what Star Wars would do, which is appealing to a large audience and just, a fun, really great adventure and escapism and just all those fun things you look forward to. At least I look forward to, like specifically in science fiction. And it's I don't know, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoying seeing how they're putting all the shows together. And I've enjoyed everything that they've done, talking with all the different ones. But I'd have to say this one and the last one are my two favorite, because I'm a bit of a process junkie. Even though this doesn't directly apply, to comic book illustration, in the sense of a lot of the stuff that I do love seeing how they're putting all these things together and how they're taking and utilizing all these different techniques, to bring all the creatures and the characters, to life. I think it's really, really fascinating.
They did touch on the concept art for Baby Yoda a little bit. They did bring that in, where they were talking about the different versions of Baby Yoda, as the process was going on, and they showed some of those images. And they talked about how they thought that some of them were like too cute, some of them were too ugly, and then they finally had this one design that basically is the basis of what we see on screen. And they said, okay, that's it. There's just something very endearing about that particular design. And they obviously made a fantastic choice, because, Baby Yoda has stolen the show. Even people that don't really like the show still like Baby Yoda. Baby Yoda has become like a phenomenon. And I know there are detractors of Baby Yoda, but let's face it, you're in the very small minority if you're someone that doesn't like Baby Yoda. You know what I mean? In some ways, it kind of reminds me of Ewoks at the time that Ewoks actually came out. Not today, not with adults looking back. But when Ewoks first came out, they were universally beloved by the kids that saw that movie. I mean, Ewok fever was everywhere. I remember kids coming on the bus with their Ewoks and stuff like that. I mean, it was a huge phenomenon. That's why they had 2 TV movies for it. That's why they had a cartoon. You know what I mean? It was like a phenomenon. And, Baby Yoda to me is very much like that. But what's interesting about Baby Yoda is it seems to me that adults love Baby Yoda as much as kids do. You know what I mean? Like there's so many adults that are into Baby Yoda.
No, it's all really interesting. And I do remember how much everybody loved the Ewoks back in the day too. I particularly enjoyed, I think of all the Ewok stuff they did, besides, obviously them in Return of the Jedi, I think my favorite thing was actually the Ewoks cartoon. I remember watching and enjoying that cartoon quite a bit as a kid, I do remember, I think I liked it more than Droids. Droids to me always seemed to be like on the edge of being Star Wars, because it just never brought those classic characters in enough that for me it ever really felt truly like Star Wars. It's weird, because I remember when I watched Solo, I had that same weird disconnect that I had with the Droids cartoon. It's like, I know this is supposed to be Star Wars, but it just doesn't click. But I always enjoyed the Ewoks cartoons. I really enjoyed those, from back in the day. And we have
I just wanted to say, growing up, I actually had my best friend was a big Droids fan, which I like Droids. In fact, I even own a copy of one of the DVDs for Droids. But I was always a bigger fan of the Ewoks cartoon than Droids. But I watched both of them. I liked both of them.
And I'd have to say I really like the intro song. It's very sort of 80s kitschy cartoon kind of thing, but I've always loved the intro song for Droids. That's the one thing. And there's that group where they dress up like Transformers that I think are called Cybertron and Spree or something like that. I forget the exact name. They have a really interesting cover of that. It's crazy to see Transformers, singing the theme song from Droids. So it's pretty
Which, by the way, on the DVD they don't have that because that particular song was made by the drummer from the Police, and so there's a rights issue. So they don't even have the song on the DVD, which is a real shame.
That's one of the best things. I really like that song. So, it'd be fun. I'd love to see someone take stuff from The Mandalorian and actually cut it to that song. I wonder if that might be fun. That'd be an interesting sort of thing.
That would be neat. That would be neat. Any of you people that are good at editing and like to do your little fan edits, somebody needs to do that.
I think it'd be fun. Really cool. So, because the hook is trouble again. I think it'd be fun. So yeah.
No, I can see it. I can actually see it in my head, Dave. I think that actually would be a lot of fun. That would be a lot of fun. Of course, you'll be hit with a copyright hit immediately once you do something like that. But
that's why you put it on Vimeo instead. just don't even bother putting it on
Peggy's
YouTube.
Back, and Peggy says, "I love the combo. It's so much more seamless than what Lucas did when he went back over and redid the original series." And by the way, they did kind of touch on that in the previous episode, the contrast of just using blue screen versus, using this projection screen has really opened things up for them quite a bit. And obviously that combination of practical along with the screen, like I said, it's almost like a live action blue screen, but they have a lot more practical effects going on than a traditional blue screen or green screen setup. And she also says, I've always loved the concept art that we are sometimes allowed to see. Just that type of art, it could fill volumes of books. And we talked about that when we were reviewing the Mandalorian episodes themselves, how much we enjoyed the concept art. And I'm wondering if that's going to be a bigger part of the next episode, because the next episode is entitled Visualization. So I'm wondering if that might be part of it. I'm thinking there's going to be more like they might talk about the CGI, possibly, but also I'm hoping, since it is called Visualization, that they might focus more on that beautiful concept art that you see at the end of the in the credits at the end of every single Mandalorian episode, because that stuff is awesome. I love that stuff.
Well, and the whole concept of visualization is, Eric, being versed in films, knows it's every concept that it's all those different, not concept, it's not the right word. It's all the different steps and the processes that help you to craft, the design and the look and the vision. So I'm pretty sure the visualization we'll see some animatics. We're going to see just some straight up concept art. I think we're going to see character designs. They haven't really spent a lot of time, for example, really telling us about, what all they were specifically looking at when they were crafting The Mandalorian. We know there's some influence from the holiday special because The Mandalorian has like Boba Fett's little, tuning fork looking gun. So we know that they were
Favreau directly referenced the holiday special as like part of sort of like the inspiration for this show and the precedent for this show, because he was talking about specifically the holiday special and the Ewok movies as sort of being like where he's at, because he's basically on the peripherals, because he's not part of the big film, right? He's not part of one of the big films. So he's actually saying he's in the same category. He implied that basically, that he's part of that lineage and that heritage of the holiday special and the Ewok movies. And it's so funny to me because so many people today are very dismissive of all that. And he embraces it. He's like, that's the club I'm in. That's the realm that I'm in right now. You know what I mean? And he just fully embraces it. And he doesn't, there's no shame or anything like that. He's like, he's just rolling with it. And like you said, direct references.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the Mandalorian's weapon, that's a direct reference to the holiday special and the weapon that Boba Fett had when he first appeared, and then also those creatures that are directly from the battle for Endor. You know what I mean? And they even use the stop motion for some of that,
Yeah.
you know, which is what they used originally when they created those creatures. So I think that's just, I think, like I said, the guy's obviously a fan. I mean, he's obviously just like a Star Wars nut. I mean, which is pretty cool.
And that's kind of what I am really kind of excited for, kind of moving forward, and specific with this next episode. I want to see what specifically they were looking at for some of these characters, and how they kind of, you know, put the designs together. They showed us a good little bit of that with the child, or the baby Yoda, on this last episode, because they kind of touched on it. But visualization is so many different things that helps you to kind of see and craft and put the world together. But I do feel like we're going to see more of that, you know, really beautiful sort of like key art that they show us at the end of the episodes, that kind of show us kind of how they kind of put together the visual for the world, and how they kind of saw it coming together. But I think that we might see some rough storyboards. I think we'll definitely see some animatics. And I do think that we're going to see hopefully some design stuff. And I really hope they'll spend a little bit of time on the Mandalorian. I want to know specifically what they were looking at, you know, in the world of Star Wars, but also outside of the world of Star Wars too, because they have talked a lot about Westerns kind of here and there. And, you know, I do feel a little Clint Eastwood from The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, with the poncho kind of thing, with the Mandalorian's cape and everything. So I'm very curious to see, you know, what they kind of show us, and how they kind of pulled some of his design elements together. Because I think the Mandalorian's design is really cool too. So because he's Fett, but he's just not Boba Fett. That's the thing that's kind of neat. You know, he's got those elements, but very clearly they were looking to craft something different. So I'm very curious to see. Hopefully they'll get into that in the next episode. So I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the concept art is a lot of fun. We have some comments here. Jane was saying, yes, adults like Baby Yoda. I just got one for my birthday, which I didn't even know there were any Baby Yoda stuff that was available. Last I heard, I thought that's a lot of that stuff was being delayed. So you're very lucky, because I want a Baby Yoda myself, and I don't have one. Man, I'd love to have one of those puppets, like an authentic, like, you know, almost, you know, screen accurate puppet would be so cool. And then Anthony says, am I the only one who expects to see the child / Baby Yoda in a Star Wars film taking place 50 to 100 years in the future? I hope for him to become the second Mandalorian Jedi Knight wielding the Darksaber. Now that's an interesting idea, and I for one am not exactly sure what the plan is for Baby Yoda, but I have my own theory, and I have touched on my theory, which I would say unfortunately ties into what was the last Disney Wars film? I don't even care about their names anymore.
The rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, well, the Rise of Skywalker, obviously they brought the Emperor back. So my theory is that Baby Yoda is integral to that process. That, like, they're going to use him. Like I use the analogy of like a battery. Like he's going to be some sort of like force battery to basically bring the Emperor back. And that's heavily implied in the dialogue from Moff Gideon, where Moff Gideon talks about how, you know, this child is more valuable to him than the Mandalorian could possibly know. And, like, to me, it just seems kind of obvious that that's what the Baby Yoda's significance is, that he's going to be used somehow to resurrect the Emperor. Now, your scenario, Anthony, I think would be awesome. I think that would be great if they did something like that. And who knows? They could change. Like they could decide, they for instance, they could have been thinking what I'm saying and then decide, you know what? Screw that. You know, Baby Yoda is so freaking popular. We're just going to go in a totally different direction. I do have a news item that's related to what you're talking about, though, Anthony. Not specifically with Yoda, but it is related to your theory. There's some speculation out there that kind of goes along the lines of what you're talking about, and I'll bring that up during our pop culture news segment because I do have a story about that, about some speculation about season 3 of The Mandalorian, because we've heard a lot about season 2 already, and it seems like there's going to be just tons and tons and tons of characters from like Clone Wars and things like that that are going to be popping up. But there is some speculation out there about season 3 and the direction of where the character, the Mandalorian, might be going. And it's very much what you're talking about. So stay tuned for that, Anthony, because I think you'll be interested in that. But I like your idea. And I do think it's absolutely possible because of the popularity of the character. You know what I mean? Like it just because the character is so popular, it resonates so much with people. It almost seems like a no-brainer to do something like that, to put him in a movie. But we'll have to see, because they don't always take the obvious path. I mean, we all know that they didn't put Luke and Han together. I thought that was like a no-brainer. Didn't happen. Never got to see Luke and Han together again in Disney Wars films. So they don't always take the obvious path when it comes to Disney and Lucasfilm right now. So your guess is as good as mine, right?
Yeah, I would have to say I think that whatever might have been maybe the original idea for what to do with the child, I wouldn't be surprised if some of that has changed when they see sort of the pop culture connection that the child has made of Baby Yoda with Star Wars fans of all kinds, whether old or new fans. I think the child is such a beloved character at this point. I can't imagine that they're going to do to him that might have been the Empire's plan, and that might be what the Empire intends to do this whole time. But I don't think the Baby Yoda will spend much time in some kind of weird booth being drained like a battery, because the character's too beloved for that now. That's just my opinion. They could prove me wrong. I mean, look at some of the stuff they did with Star Trek. I never thought they'd do, but I have faith in what Filoni and Favreau are doing. That I think that they're such big Star Wars fans, and they see that they've created this amazing character that's caught on with people. I think that they're going to continue to find a way to move forward and just tell interesting stories. Because most of the Mandalorian episodes are episodic, even though there's an overarching theme. You know what I mean? They are kind of episodic adventures. So they're kind of, bucking the system in terms of what everybody believes to be, the end thing, with a lot of the streaming shows anyway. So I have a lot of faith in what they're going to do. The fact that Favreau, like you said, Eric, considers himself to be part of the holiday special / the Ewok adventures kind of thing. That's kind of cool because that means he's, I think, some ways more interested in telling stories and just entertaining people, than maybe necessarily trying to connect all the dots. And I think that's what the Mandalorian needs to do, is just continue to take us further into their corner of the world of Star Wars and just continue to take us along on the adventure and just keep us entertained. And let's have some fun. And let's not worry about trying to connect all the dots, in my, personal opinion. So.
Yeah. It's kind of anybody's guess. And like I said, there are all sorts of rumors about a power struggle going on in Lucasfilm because, I'll just put it right out there. I do not like what Kathleen Kennedy has done at Lucasfilm. I think her tenure has been an absolute disaster, with the exception of Rogue One, which I think is actually an excellent film. I really enjoy that. I put that in the top tier of all Star Wars. I really enjoy that film. But I think that was really the director. And I think that's the case also with The Mandalorian. It's Favreau, it's the director, it's his vision, the fact that he has some actual real creativity. And you can see that in this special. You can see that Favreau really knows his stuff. And so this is a guy I think that really kind of sticks to his guns and comes in with the vision. And I can only assume that unlike some of the other directors who have been fired or kind of pushed to the side or all those different kinds of issues that have happened, I think he's got enough juice because of all the work that he's done previously. It's got him to that point where he was hired and they said, you do what you want to do. You know what I mean? Whatever she says, you just do what you want to do, because that's why we hired you. We hired you to do this show, and we have confidence in you. And that's kind of the vibe that I get, that he really is the one running the show. Because again, with that body language, when they have that round table and Kathleen Kent, and it's a round table, it is a round table, but the way the camera is set up, you know who's at the head of that table. And it's not Kathleen Kennedy. It's Favre. He's the one who runs the dialogue. He's running the show. You know what I mean? Literally. When he's talking, she's off to the side, and he's the one talking. He's the one engaging people. He's the one bringing up points. He's the one asking questions. You know what I mean? So I just think that's very telling of his style and how he fits in with this particular show. And again, he mentions that this is like his little corner, very much like, you know, the holiday special was its own little thing, very much as the Ewok specials were their little thing. He's like, well, this is my little thing now. You know what I mean? This is my little thing. I'm not part of the big pictures, the big movies and stuff like that. I'm just doing my little show. You know what I mean? Hope you like it. You know, that kind of a thing.
No, yeah, and you know, I'd say, and you know, I really, I'm with Eric because I really liked Rogue One. We've had many conversations on the show about how great Rogue One is. I mean, Rogue One is such a fantastic Star Wars movie. I can't recommend Rogue One enough. And even off camera, Eric and I have had very long conversations too. And I've had conversations, you know, with just general people around talking about. I'll never forget the reaction I had when I saw that, you know, the X-wing and the Y-wing pilots and everything that we saw basically just meet a horrible demise in the first Star Wars film. It was so much fun getting to see them actually win. I'll never forget
that's very cool.
the thrill I had. I'll never forget that because I didn't even think about that. I wasn't expecting it. And when the X-wings come flying in, I just assumed it was going to be all new characters. And when I realized it's like, oh, these are the guys. This is why they would have them run, you know, basically take on the Death Star, because these are the guys who pulled off this crazy, there's no way they're going to survive this mission. It's like, this is the A-team. You know what I mean? Right. That's why they, you know, everybody was like, I know they could do it. I'll never forget that thrill I had in the theater realizing these guys are going to win. Because I've watched Star Wars so many times, and I've seen those guys, you know, just die so many times. That was just so much fun watching them be, you know, really great, competent, great fighter pilots, and seeing them win was so much fun. I'll never forget that thrill I had in the movie theater, because I literally almost jumped out of my seat when I realized it was about to happen. I was like, we're going to see these guys do the job. I was like, this is so awesome. And then you follow that up with Vader, you know, showing us why the rebel troopers were shaking in their boots when the stormtroopers are coming through the blast door. And I was like going, this is so awesome, because it answers so many questions, and it fills in, for me as a Star Wars fan, it fills in so many sort of like little gaps, you know, and little things that some of it, like I said, never thought about. And some of the rest of us like, go, wow, this is really cool. I love Rogue One. But I've also said too, I mean, I'll state it. I liked Force Awakens. You know, I didn't hate Force Awakens. And I thought that there was a lot of potential there. I'm not a fan of Last Jedi at all. And I feel like Rise of Skywalker is at best a mixed bag. And it's weird with everything that's going on right now. I can't help but kind of just slightly reflect. And I've said it before, what a missed opportunity. And I've said this with a lot of other people, what a missed opportunity, that Finn, you know, didn't eventually turn out to be a Jedi. I keep with everything that's going on, I keep thinking about that. What a missed opportunity that was, because I thought that's what they were going to do with his character, and at the end of the day, they didn't do much with his character at all. And it's a lot of those films to me are just a lot of wasted opportunity. And there's so much promise and so much potential at the end of Force Awakens, and then when you see what they did with it, there's some interesting ideas, but for me, it just doesn't really play through very well. But no,
And
yeah,
I look at it very much, in a similar way, but instead of like missed opportunity, I use the term garbage. That's just the way that I look at
well,
it.
well,
Now
well, there you go.
there is a good discussion going on here in the Rogues Gallery right now. I did want to mention that Jane did give some clarification about her baby Yoda. It's a bobblehead. It's a bobblehead pop, which apparently the love of pops runs in the family, Dave. So she does have a baby Yoda pop. But Anthony was talking about. He said I was thinking about how this can fit into the High Republic, which Dave, you talked about the High Republic last week in last week's show. He says, considering both Yoda and Yaddle will exist and will be the only members of his species since then. And once Ahsoka shows up, I assume Anthony means once Ahsoka shows up in The Mandalorian, if that could have some implications as well. And then Peggy was kind of getting on that. It says, Anthony, isn't Yoda gone by the time The Mandalorian takes place? The female one, though, which is Yaddle, the female one, though, isn't that who we thought was the mother, which that was a fan theory. A lot of people thought that Baby Yoda is, in fact, Yoda's son, and that the mother is Yaddle. Yaddle, for people that don't know, is obviously a female member of Yoda's species that appears in, I believe, episode 1. She's on the Jedi Council in episode 1. So kind of an interesting discussion there about the possibilities of where the character might go, where the character might have come from. Because remember, the child is 50 years old. That has been established, that the child is 50 years old. So the child's age actually goes beyond the scope of even episode 1. You know what I mean? It goes beyond that. It could be sort of the end of that High Republic era, because I think you know better than me, Dave. I think the High Republic is supposed to be like 100 years before episode 1 or something like that. Does that sound right? Or is it 300 years?
I don't remember exactly, because I since they delayed a lot of that stuff that they were planning to do, I've kind of not been paying too much attention to it at the moment. But I do know that I've seen a lot of fan theories where they're talking about where the child kind of would fit in or come in terms of the storyline. It would make sense. They would try to connect some of those dots, and I think there's some fun to be had there. But at the same point too, I do think there's something to be said for what Favreau's been saying, that this is kind of their own little corner, and they're kind of just doing their own little thing. So who knows if connecting all the dots. I do think we're going to connect a lot of dots to Clone Wars. I think that's definitely going to happen, because Filoni's there. Favreau was the voice of one of the main characters in the Mandalorian episodes. I think he led with us the Death's Hand or Death's Head or whatever it's called at one point. The Splinter Mandalorian group. So I do think we're going to connect a lot of dots to Clone Wars, and I think we're going to see a lot of those storylines moved forward. But I do think it's all going to sit on its own little side pocket thing. I don't know if they're going to necessarily feel the need to connect all the dots, because they've talked a lot about too that the High Republic's supposed to be new characters. They're new characters and a new timeline, and they're really wanting to introduce us and bring us into that world. So I don't know how much they're going to be concerned with.
I think the overall point here is that Yoda's alive during that time, clearly, because Yoda's supposed to be 800 years old. So I think that's what it comes. That's where it comes from. And Anthony mentions, as far as the High Republic, he says it's 200 years before it. He says it should have been 400. In a previous comment, he mentioned, because he was answering Peggy, he said Yoda has been dead for 5 years in terms of when The Mandalorian starts. Yaddle apparently died within the time between episode 2 and the end of the Clone Wars. I believe this child is a natural-born native to their mystery planet, and it says question mark. And that's an interesting idea there, because regardless of whether, well, obviously, if he was Yoda's son somehow, obviously he would be natural-born, unless he's a clone, which you could still regard a clone as his son. It's just that he's a clone. but that you're saying that you think that he's a natural born child from their planet, which I also think is interesting, because I haven't actually really heard that before, where somebody has said maybe he's just one of the species and he just happens to be out there and we don't know how he got there or anything like that, but he's got parents, then maybe they were killed or who knows what happened to him, and he's just a natural born member of Yoda's species and doesn't have any direct relation to Yoda other than he's from the same species and that's it. I think that's entirely possible. That that's the case. It's funny though, I haven't heard a lot of people say that he's just another member of Yoda's race. That's it. There's no other connection to Yoda other than the fact that the child is part of Yoda's race.
Well, and the reason I think that they'll probably go that direction too is because I think a lot of people like the idea of spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen Rise of Skywalker, they like the idea of what they were going to do with Rey when it was rumor. And then when they actually did it in Rise of Skywalker, a lot of people seemed to armchair quarterback take offense, even though there's so many people championing it. Like I said, when we reviewed that movie, I didn't particularly hate what they did with Rey. I just thought they'd spent a little bit more time setting it up, because one of the most interesting ideas I thought to come out of Rise of Skywalker is the idea of those Sith Zealots, this group that's trying to bring Palpatine back no matter what. And I'm curious to see if we'll see more exploration of that concept, in The Mandalorian down the road. If their vision or their original idea of what the Empire, the remnants of the Empire, intended to do with Baby Yoda, if Werner Herzog's character, for example, and even Moff Gideon, if they're part of this Sith zealot culture that wants to bring Palpatine back, I think there's a lot of interesting things that could be done there with that concept. So,
well, I think that's what they're doing. I think that's my whole theory about the Baby Yoda being a battery. I think that's exactly what they're doing, is that Moff Gideon is part of this Imperial loyalist group, because if you follow the Disney War continuity, which sadly I know more about it than I even want to, because I just don't care, but I know more than I want to. And basically the planet that Rey is on, Tatooine 2, I don't even care about what they call them anymore and stuff like that. That planet was basically where the last battle happened between the rebellion and the remnants of the Empire. It was a year after Return of the Jedi. They had one last big battle. It was the big last stand of the Empire, and the Empire obviously lost. And that's why you see destroyed Star Destroyers and destroyed AT-ATs and stuff like that on Rey's planet, which is Jakku, right? Jakku. It's Tatooine, but whatever. It's Jakku. So that's the idea. And then The Mandalorian takes place 4 years after that. So obviously the Empire, as it was, has been completely destroyed. And what becomes the First Order under Snoke, those people have left. They basically went beyond the outer rim territories into, I think they call it like the void or something like that. Basically, it's like unexplored space. So they fled. So Gideon represents this sort of cadre of Imperials that did not leave with the First Order. And obviously, if you progress with Disney Wars, you know what happens. The idea that there were Imperial officers that apparently stayed and resurrected the Emperor. And I think that's clear what Moff Gideon represents. He's part of that faction, that he's going to be someone that's involved with bringing the Emperor back. He did not go with the First Order, because the First Order is already gone. They've already basically, what becomes the First Order, that part of the Imperial remnant, they're already in like unexplored space. They left. They're gone. They're not going to come back until The Force Awakens.
Well, like I said, I'm curious to see what they do with it. So I think there's a lot of potential. So we've still got some more discussion going on over here in the Rogues Gallery. I'm not sure. Let's see here. Peggy makes the comment. She says, "I like the idea of these guys not connecting things for a long time. Let them spread the world out bigger." I agree with that. I would recommend that's what they do. Continue to explore their pocket of the universe and what they're doing, and not be too terribly concerned with connecting all the dots. At least not right now. Maybe after another season or two. And then Peggy has another comment. She says, "Hey, maybe Baby Yoda is the actual result of midichlorian conception, just like Anakin. It's a possibility." And then Anthony, YouTube fan, says, "However, that species in canon is known for being naturally adept with the Force. That would make this verbiage of uber Force users from an unknown planet quite an asset to anyone, especially the First Order." Yeah, that's very true. And then Peggy says, maybe they are just naturally adept because midichlorians are just attracted to their natural cuteness. This is quite possible. That is quite possible. I think a lot of people are naturally attracted to the cuteness of the child. So.
I do have to say that I realize that's been something for a while, Anthony, as far as the idea that Yoda's species is adept at the Force or powerful with the Force. But that's something personally I never really liked. I like to think that Yoda is special because Yoda's special, not because he's just part of some race that happens to be good at the Force. That I feel kind of takes something away from him. But I realize that I'm in the minority on that. That's just that train has sailed, so to speak. Basically, that's the idea that Yoda's species is very adept at the Force. That's why the child is good at the Force, because it's just something that's sort of in their blood, And I do think that's an interesting idea, Peggy, of the sort of midichlorian conception, if you will. I know a lot of fans hate the whole idea of the midichlorians and just wish that would just go away and think that's a terrible idea that George Lucas had. But I actually think that's an interesting idea. I think it's even, when you said that, it makes me think, what if all of Yoda's species is like that? Like, what if they don't even have like natural conception? What if all of Yoda's species actually comes from this sort of, midichlorian, conception, if you will? In other words, they don't biologically conceive the way that normal beings do. I think that would be kind of an interesting idea.
Well, that's definitely an approach that they could take. We'll just have to kind of wait and see.
Because you have to remember, these guys are George Lucas loyalists. I'm coining that term. These are George Lucas loyalists. They're very much in the George Lucas camp. In fact, one of the previous episodes, Filoni just really defended episode 1. He really was like, yeah, this really tied things together. It was really interesting. I think that was in the second episode, Dave. Do you remember? I think that was the one on directing. Does that sound right? Your mic is off, by the way.
Sorry. No, I was going to say yes, and that was one of the highlights I felt like of the show. In all honesty, was especially those early episodes, was hearing Filoni kind of connect the dots, with what Lucas had been doing, from his original trilogy of films, and of course with the prequels, and how they all interconnected. And it was very interesting to hear him talk about, how those beats, kind of play out and foreshadow events, that were to come. It's very interesting that's one of the high points. I'll be honest with you, I think it's one of the high points of this show just in general, that with Filoni talking about that. It was very, very interesting to hear him discuss that. So,
and by the way, that was episode 2, but that's legacy. Episode 1 was directing. Yeah. Episode 2 was legacy, and obviously that's why. And Filoni steals the show. It's kind of funny because he's at that directors roundtable, and the directors, they're all like, basically all alphas. You know what I mean? They're all people they're directors. You know what I mean? That's their personalities. That's the way they are. And it's funny because generally Favre is kind of running the show. He is the showrunner, and then Filoni just takes over and just gets into the legacy of George Lucas and the legacy of Star Wars. And again, it's just really interesting to see him really go to bat for episode 1. I mean, it's very clear that he has an immense amount of loyalty to George Lucas. and he really defends them. And hey, Man of Sand's back. We're always glad to see you out here, Man of Sand. When you make a comment, glad to see you again. And he does mention, I'd imagine Disney will want to use the Mandalorian show to promote whatever else Disney is doing, whether High Republic or other parts of the extended universe. And Man of Sand, I think there's no doubt that they're going to do that. As much as I think a lot of us want them to kind of just do their own thing, it's going to be inevitable that just as a business decision, with the success of The Mandalorian and also the popularity of The Child, it seems just like they're going to have to try to tie in some of the rest of the other projects into The Mandalorian somehow. And that goes back to Anthony, YouTube fans' earlier comment about the idea of could they possibly incorporate the High Republic into the creation of The Child somehow or something like that. I think they very well could, because it just seems like a no-brainer business decision that you would take something that's popular, take something that people like, and you would try to use it to get acceptance for your other projects. In fact, Dave, this is pure speculation, but you brought up that the High Republic was delayed. That could very well be the reason why. That basically somebody, Iger or Kennedy or somebody said, you know what? We need something about like Baby Yoda in here or something like that. Like we need to incorporate this stuff better, because right now they're like, nobody's going to like this. There's no hook. You know what I mean? It's like we need something to bring it all together. Like we need a Mandalorian in there. Or, you know what I mean? I could see those discussions happening. I could see a scenario like that.
Yeah, they had said that they had delayed things, and there was all different reasons for why. I think the main tenor of the story was just because of what was happening at the moment, and that was specifically related to the pandemic. But no, it would make sense too that from a marketing standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, they were also probably thinking, well, we need to find a way, to take some of these elements that people really love and find a way to incorporate them, into what we're already doing over here with the High Republic. But I will state again, the goal of the High Republic is for it to be its own separate thing to an extent. And I'm not sure how much connecting the dots they will do. And like I said, I'm not sure connecting the dots is the best move. I think if the High Republic is good, it'll stand on its own. And then just the same way the Mandalorian is good and it's able to stand on its own. I don't mind connecting a few things here and there. And I am excited for what they're going to be doing, hopefully, with season 2 and connecting it to, Clone Wars and some of the things that we've heard, bringing in.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, the rumor is that there's going to be tons of connections to Clone Wars in The Mandalorian. Those rumors are flying all over the place. And we've talked about, the Ahsoka being in there. Bo-Katan? All sorts of characters from the Clone Wars apparently are going to be incorporated into The Mandalorian.
And I think it's all related to the fact that Moff Gideon has the Darksaber. I think it all goes back to that. It's the fact that, I wouldn't be surprised if the original idea was, well, he's got to get out of the TIE fighter. Hey, what if he did this? Oh, that's cool. Well, how would he have the Darksaber? Don't worry about it. We'll explain it later. I can see it being nothing more than that. And now they have to find a way to explain it. And then, by sort of proxy or process or whatever, here comes all these other disparate elements that have to explain it. You're talking about Bo-Katan, you're talking about Ahsoka Tano. They're going to have to explain, how it is that Moff Gideon comes to have the Darksaber. So it'll be curious to see.
Well, Anthony, YouTube fan, mentions there are rumors that season 2 will make reference to elements from the High Republic, just as the High Republic will involve species, planets, and artifacts related to the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars. And that's interesting because I had not heard that. I'd heard that the High Republic might involve, species, planets, artifacts related to the prequel trilogy and obviously the Clone Wars. But I had not heard that season 2 would have references to the High Republic. We've heard all sorts of rumors, Dave, right? That there will be tons of, as we just mentioned, there'll be tons of references to Clone Wars. We've reported on that, on some of the casting rumors and announcements that have happened. But that's something that I hadn't heard before, and that's kind of interesting. I had not heard, but again, this is pure speculation on my part, but we reported last week that the High Republic had been delayed. And more, I feel like the delay has nothing to do with the pandemic and could very well be to retool the High Republic so it does tie in to the Mandalorian somehow better. I just see that scenario more and more in my head.
Or it could be because they realize that because Timothy Oliphant's going to be in season 2 of The Mandalorian, they have to work in all those Justified references. It could be that. Which again, I'll recommend those of you watching the show right now, if you haven't watched the Justified, and if you have Hulu, those first couple of seasons of Justified are pretty awesome. What are you waiting for? Well, wait until the show's over. But you should be checking out Justified on Hulu. Because I do think part of the reason for having Timothy Oliphant come in to The Mandalorian, I think, is the whole Western connection. It is the fact that Timothy Oliphant was on Deadwood. It is the fact that he was also on Justified. And he plays a very specific kind of character. And when you hear from the expanded universe, the novels, the books, the character that he supposedly plays and the connection to Boba Fett, it would make sense that, Marshall Raylan Givens is, in the suit. And I wouldn't be surprised, again, if there's, for those of us that are eagle-eyed and fans of Justified, that they don't work in some little Justified little things kind of here and there for those of us that are paying attention. So,
does anybody on the crew have any connection to Justified?
I don't think so.
Has any of the directors that worked on Justified been announced to be involved with The Mandalorian?
I'll have to look into it. I don't think so. I honestly don't think so.
Because you're the Justified guy, so.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I haven't looked into it that far. Because I was surprised at the announcement that they cast Timothy Oliphant. And then when I heard what they were going to do with him and his character and reference to what we believe they're going to do with his character and where his character theoretically comes from, it's like, oh, it makes sense you go get, Marshall Raylan Givens because he would totally fit that role. And he's definitely got his gunslinger swagger down big time if you're paying attention to Justified. So, and that, like I said, that's the really fun thing about that. I mean, if the rumors are true, you can have the Mandalorian versus Boba Fett, and when the Mandalorian wins, no one's going to cry foul because it's not really Boba Fett.
Except me, because I've made my opinion clear that if Boba Fett's not in this, I'm going to revolt. I'm going to be very, very angry. You know what I mean? So,
I think
I want the Boba Fett. I do not want an imposter. I don't want an impersonator. I don't just want his armor. You know what I mean? That to me is cheap. You know what I mean? I want him. I want him. If the rumors that we've talked about are true, my hope is that the Boba Fett impersonator is eventually going to be found out by the real Boba Fett. That would be my hope. I do not want Boba Fett flashbacks. I don't want that. I want Boba Fett. I want him back. And if he's not back, I'm going to be upset. Period. I'm just going to be upset. So that's what I want, Do I always get what I want? No. That's why we have Disney Wars. That's why Disney Wars exists, because I didn't get anything I wanted. You know what I mean? So sometimes that's the way it goes, right? They don't ask me.
Well,
they don't consult with me.
There's a lot of potential there, for, again, like I said, the Mandalorian could be helping to return Boba Fett's armor to him. Or it could be like we stated before. There's also, you and I speculated, another fun idea would be the fact that, Boba Fett learns that this guy is using his armor and basically comes to Colin to take his armor back. And maybe the Mandalorian.
Yeah, I like that scenario.
But that's what I'm saying. The fun thing is that if Boba and Mando are working together, you know what I mean? And their goal in one episode is to basically get his armor back to him. You know what I mean? That's really cool. I think that could be a lot of fun. And then by the end of the episode, you have Boba Fett in his classic armor, and he's there with the Mandalorian. You know what I mean? And they share in that brotherhood. I mean, there's a lot of potential here. A lot of potential to do something fun. So we'll just have to see what they decide to do with it. But the idea too that this guy's running around in the Mandalorian's the Boba Fett's armor, without Boba Fett's permission, and Boba doesn't like that, and he's trying to run him down. That could be fun too. It just depends upon how they decide to put it together. But the fact that Tammy Morrison has been cast, and we know he's going to be in the Mandalorian season 2, increases the possibility that we're going to see, you know what I mean? Boba Fett, basically hopefully reclaim his place. I
Or
can't.
it just turns out that he's going to be some guy in the background, just some completely random guy just sitting in the background, not Boba Fett, just in the bar scene, and that's it. You know what I mean?
We've heard enough. We've heard enough from Filoni and Favreau that I don't think that's what they're going to do, because Filoni is involved. At the very least, he'll play Captain Rex or some. I really honestly
I actually could see that scenario. I could totally see that scenario, that everybody's thinking he's going to be Boba Fett, and it turns out that he's going to be a clone trooper. You know what I mean? Whether it's Captain Rex or another character, it's going to be he's a clone trooper, which I think a lot of fans would like. Obviously, a lot of Clone Wars fans would like. I would be disappointed in that personally, but I could totally see that. I could totally see that happen.
But imagine this. Imagine if they think he's this one character, and there's this one moment, and when no one's kind of paying attention, he knocks someone out, and he takes the armor back with him, and it turns out it really is Boba Fett all along. And no one realized that was him, and then he dons the armor
actually pretending to be a clone trooper.
Yeah.
And that's what they think he is, and then it turns out that it actually was Boba Fett. That would actually be a neat twist, because that would actually use that whole lineage for a neat payoff and all that stuff. I like that scenario, but again, that's all pure speculation on our part. And speaking of speculation, the Rogues Gallery is talking about. Peggy mentions that they should have the High Republic stay separate for at least for a season to make sure it can stand on its own. Then start small tethers connecting on the fringe to the Mandalorian. Then actors jumping between the two shows will be welcome. But Peggy, just to clarify, the High Republic doesn't have its own show, at least not yet. It's only going to be novelizations. There hasn't been any announcement of the High Republic having a show. I'm sure that's what they hope for. They're hoping that the High Republic is successful, as sort of basically starting the Disney EU, if you will. That's really what it is. So if it is successful, then I think you absolutely could see more tie-ins. But I kind of see the scenario more and more that they're going to try to do something, right off the bat. Just because the Mandalorian is so popular, it just doesn't seem to me that Disney would not try to exploit that in some way. I mean, they know they got a hit on their hands. They know that this is the big driving force for Disney Plus, which is basically, doing far and above, any of the other non-Netflix competitors, as far as the streaming wars are going. And it just seems to me like they would do something to use the Mandalorian to elevate the High Republic. Because honestly, Dave and I talked about it, last week when we were talking about that story of the delay. I think even you said it, Peggy. I think you even mentioned in the comments that for a lot of people, the High Republic is like, eh. I mean, the enthusiasm gap there seems immense from my perspective and from what I've heard and seen. And they got to do something. They got to do something to make people excited about the High Republic, to make people want to buy those books and to possibly get a movie or get a TV series. So right now, I don't think they're there. Right now, I think they know that they might be sitting on a big dud if they don't do something. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see what they do. I mean, and it's funny too, because I think about how for the longest time, like Star Wars and even Star Trek sometimes is kept alive, by those books that are so often kind of dismissed, but without them, you know what I mean? I wonder if the fandom would have been able to, kind of hold on the way that it did. Kind of in the same way that for a period there, what Richard Hatch was doing with the Battlestar Galactica books was doing the same thing. with the novels and the comics, keeping the fandom engaged and keeping them interested in those stories, so that when the time came right, the fandom was still there. Otherwise they might have forgotten. So,
and the fandom could be taken away from him by Ron Moore.
Yeah. But
that's another discussion for another. There's going to be plenty of Battlestar Galactica discussions coming up with the Peacock show. You know what I mean? As we get more news about that,
right?
So that stuff is going to be, that buzz is going to be going, and
But I sit here referencing and talking about those books. You know what I mean? And still talking. So that's what I'm saying. It's like the legacy of that material can live way beyond, you know what I mean, and continue to carry a fan and their imagination, much further than sometimes at some of the other productions. They're fun. Like I liked Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica, but I still love classic. And when I think of classic, I think of what Richard Hatch was doing with those books. That immediately comes to mind, because it's so heavily steeped in that world, because Richard Hatch loved it so much. And that love just comes dripping off of the page. And for someone like me who loves Battlestar Galactica, it continues to push my fandom, forward in the classic, era, of the show. So just saying. So we do have a couple more comments here. I guess we want to work through those. Peggy followed up her other comment, and she said that it's kind of like what they did with Torchwood and Doctor Who, where they kept the two shows separated for most of the episodes during the first two seasons. I could see that. And then Peggy chimes in and says that she likes my idea, the idea of Tamu Morrison playing both, being both, a clone trooper or Captain Rex, and also, obviously, Boba Fett. And she says she was just going to say that. I bet you were. You guys have interesting observations, Peggy. And then she says, and then she comments on what you said, Eric, that, the idea of making those connections because of the popularity. That makes a lot of sense. She says, oh, Disney will do that. Come on, they want that money. But I thought Disney was dropping the book's angles. Well, we'll have to see. And then she follows it up by saying, are they doing Republic as books or as graphic novels? The High Republic, as my understanding, Peggy, based on the press releases we've read, is actually going to be both. The idea is that it's a whole new kind of universe of characters and stories set within, obviously, the Star Wars universe, taking place during that particular time period, but that the books and the graphic novels are all supposed to be in support of each other. So if you're reading the Star Wars High Republic series, you'll be able to enjoy the graphic novels, and then also obviously explore and enjoy, what's happening hopefully with the books too. So the idea is that it's, hopefully both. So we'll see. She also says, because graphic novels would probably keep the light on the fans, because they could go ahead and continue to do basic animation, Clone Wars. I could see that, Peggy. I could see that. So we'll see. And then we have Max World Entertainment, who says, greetings programs, obviously a reference to Tron. And there are some people saying hi to each other. So there you go. So do we think that's good? Do we want to move forward and get into maybe the pop culture?
Let's get into some pop culture news.
Okay. All right. Very cool.
I even have a Mandalorian story too. So
cool. I was going to show these off just real quick because I've talked about my fascination with these little Funko Pop guys. So I thought I'd point them out here just real quick. I'd mentioned in the fanzine I'd be showing some of these little guys off. So this is actually Angel from the Marvel 80th. I always liked Angel as a character. I thought he was really cool. Of course, his classic X-Men outfit. And then I got him to go with my other X-Men. And then in the magazine, I also talked about my love of Marvel Saga and how much I enjoyed that series back in the day and how much I love those classic versions of the characters and how it helped to introduce and expand my fandom and love of other characters, such as Namor. One of the characters I think I name dropped. If I didn't, I should have, was actually Ant-Man. So I actually picked up the little Funko Pop for Ant-Man. This is actually not part of the Marvel 80th. celebration, although I think Ant-Man should be, because when I think of classic Marvel comics, I always think of Ant-Man with the silver helmet with the little crazy little antler, little antenna looking things. So, but they're going to hang out there together on the shelf, and we'll see.
Very cool.
All right, so that was my initial thing. What do you have for pop culture news there, Eric? And then I actually do have a story this time. I did find something interesting I thought would be fun to talk about. So,
well, I have this Mandalorian rumor. So since we've been talking about the Mandalorian, it seems just natural to go into this. So this is from WeGotThisCovered.com, and it is dated 1 day ago. And it says the Mandalorian will reportedly become, quote unquote, spoilers in season 3. Now, this, by the way, sounds like it's basically a rumor, so it's not really a spoiler. I don't think speculation is a spoiler, unless they're trying to say they really have like this great source, inside source, which everybody claims to have inside sources, whether they do or not. It's important to remember that sometimes inside sources say things that are not true. In fact, there's a really good story that I heard about all the rumors for Empire Strikes Back. And it turned out a lot of those rumors were deliberate deception by Lucasfilm. There's a whole story about that. Maybe we'll talk about that again sometime. So anyway, this article says, as the only Star Wars project in the Disney area that doesn't have Kathleen Kennedy's fingerprints all over it, although that reportedly isn't from a lack of trying, it hasn't come as a surprise that The Mandalorian has received the most widespread acclaim from critics and fans alike. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni clearly know the source material inside out, and the first season of the show was like a breath of fresh air for a franchise that seemed determined to lean on ties to the original trilogy for as long as humanly possible. However, the upcoming second run of episodes is set to delve a little deeper into the franchise's extended canon, with the introduction of several fan-favorite characters from the animated shows that look set to lay the foundation for the next generation of Star Wars stories. We've already revealed that Disney and Lucasfilm were planning on having Filoni spearhead an MCU-style Star Wars universe on the small screen. And now we've heard from our sources, the same ones that told us Ahsoka Tano would be appearing in The Mandalorian months before Rosario Dawson's casting was announced, that the title character will eventually end up harnessing the power of the Jedi and ultimately become one. Anthony, if you're still here, this is the little piece that I wanted to give you. So there is a rumor that this particular source, WeGotThisCovered.com, is claiming they have a good source that says in season 3, the Mandalorian is going to get the Darksaber and become a Jedi. Have you heard about this rumor, Dave?
I mean, I hadn't heard about it specifically. I'd heard speculation. So I didn't realize that. I mean, I'm not surprised there's people running stories about it. So we'll have to see. I'm very curious to see what they do with Ahsoka Tano. For those of us that watch the last season of the Clone Wars and see kind of where she is at the end of the Clone Wars, and then also number 2, to know kind of where she is actually towards the end of Rebels. It'll be very curious to see what they decide to do with Ahsoka just in general. It would kind of make sense, and it would follow that through line through. Ahsoka is one of those characters, kind of like the Child. I think the Child's probably a little bit more popular than Ahsoka, but I think that's just because the Child's been in live action. Ahsoka's been, more a figure of the animation world, but she's a very, very popular character. I mean, she's one of my favorite Star Wars characters. I really enjoyed watching her journey in the Clone Wars. So I will have to see, but it would make sense. But I'm very curious to see what they decide to do with Ahsoka. How large of a role she's going to play, and I'm curious too, because I also think the Darksaber, in all honesty, should just be returned to Mandalore. And basically be for Mandalorian culture, because it's an important artifact, for their history. So we'll have to see what they decide to do. I don't know. I think that there could be, as Anthony speculated too, that idea that eventually the Darksaber would wind up in the hands of the child. I kind of thought that's where that was headed, but we'll have to just see. I think it all is going to depend upon what they finally decide to do with Ahsoka, whether she's just around for a couple of episodes or she's kind of like an Obi-Wan type character and helps the Mando, learn more about the child and the Force, because clearly Mando doesn't understand anything about the Force, and nor do
Which is a
any
little
of
weird, by the way. There's this thing, and fans talk about it in some of the other aspects of Star Wars, where there seems to be this kind of weird fog about the Jedi and the Force that doesn't quite make sense. Like, a lot of people have gone back and said, like, Han Solo's attitude in the original Star Wars doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because it's like the Jedi haven't been gone that long, and Han is older than Luke. So Han should actually have at least some sort of, like, his parents told him about the Jedi or something like that. It's not like they've been extinct for 100 years or even 50 years. I mean, it was only like 20 years ago that the Jedi were taken out. So it's not even, it's basically not even quite one generation yet. And so it's kind of strange. And you have the same thing. I mean, I think we even talked about this in that particular episode, where the last episode of The Mandalorian, episode 8, I think we even talked about the attitude of the blacksmith and how she was talking to the Mandalorian about the Jedi and talking about this race of like wizard warriors, and the Mandalorian was like, what? And it's kind of like, well, the Mandalorian was a kid during the Clone Wars, which the Jedi were all over the place during the Clone Wars. So it's like, how do you not know this? You know what I mean? So there is some inconsistency when it comes to Star Wars about the people's knowledge of this stuff, and it seems a little bit weird. The question that I have about this rumor, if it's true, is how does it fit into Disney Wars? Because in Disney Wars, we know that Luke at least tried to do like some sort of a new Jedi Academy, but it was a horrible failure. And Kylo Ren ended up killing everybody. So it's like, how exactly would it fit in for the Mandalorian to become a Jedi? And by the way, that would also imply that within the next 30 years, well, 25 years, right? Within the next 25 years, he has to die, because obviously there are no Jedi by the time The Force Awakens comes around. So that's the larger question I would have is, so what would that mean about the ultimate fate of the Mandalorian himself if somehow, let's say, he gets associated with Luke's Jedi Academy and he becomes a Jedi and all that kind of stuff? Wouldn't that mean he's going to be killed by Kylo Ren?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you would think.
That's the problem with Disney Wars. That's the problem.
Yeah,
you have to fit it into that garbage. And because, like I said, I am not a Disney War fan. So it's like you're gonna, you have to fit it into that continuity. Granted, that is still 25 years off, right? But we don't know when Kylo Ren destroyed the quote unquote like new Jedi Academy. We don't know that. That wasn't established very well in the movies. We can assume it's probably maybe like within 10, 15 years of The Mandalorian is when that happens, something like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I honestly, like I said, I'm kind of hoping that they're not going to spend too much time worrying with how to connect the dots. But we'll just have to see what they ultimately decide to do. Like I said, it's pretty obvious they're going to lean pretty heavy into Clone Wars. And they'll need to sync it up at some point, at least towards the end of The Mandalorian, to explain how these events either do or do not reflect anything that happens in the Disney world. So we'll have to see.
What would be really interesting is if they just dumped Disney Wars. If they just said, yeah, we're just not going to deal with any of that. we're just going to pretend like none of that happened. You know what I mean? Or none of that's going to happen. Like we're just going to go in our own direction. Now Peggy does mention on my comment. She says, I think Mando and Han both know of the Jedi, or Han both know of the Jedi. Is that the Jedi? I think what she's trying to say is she thinks they know of the Jedi. And Han says, a bunch of mystics. If you don't have the Force, then you don't care. It's not part of your daily life. It says, we know of those who practice religious lives, but unless you're a brother or a priest or your aunt or nun or your great-grandfather was a Hindu priest, then you aren't knowledgeable. She uses the analogy, my dad was in Vietnam, but I don't know what happened to him or the battles. And Peggy, I get what you're saying, but it's a little different because to use that analogy, it's not a matter of saying that you know exactly what happened in Vietnam with your father or something like that, but you do know your father served in whatever, he served in the military of the United States. I assume he served in the United States Army. So, because there were other armies there, but I'm just assuming that. So you know that he served in the military in that war. You may not know anything about the war, but you know that he served in it. And to me, that's kind of the same as it would be, at least for a quote unquote normal person in the Star Wars universe. They should at least know that the Jedi were like these group of soldiers that fought in the Clone Wars. And actually what Han Solo says, specifically in the original Star Wars, is that he doesn't believe in the Force at all. And clearly it's like, well, a lot of people say that doesn't make a lot of sense because, he should have some knowledge that there were these sort of, group of warriors that had these special powers and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of like that would be sort of the logical extrapolation, at least in my mind, that he would have some knowledge of that. And again, I think part of that, like with Han Solo, it's important to remember when the first Star Wars came out, George Lucas did not have the entire story. George Lucas had not decided that Luke was Darth Vader's son in the original Star Wars. That was not even on the table. When the original Star Wars came out, Luke's father had been killed by Darth Vader. That's why there's that disconnect. Because as the story progressed, Lucas decided, okay, I'm going to go in this direction. And if you've ever heard of Splinters of the Mind Eye, or if you've ever read it, that shows you the direction initially that they were going to take with a sequel for Star Wars, and it's just completely different. I mean, it's completely different because he hadn't established that part of the story yet. So that's why you have that sort of disconnect. But with The Mandalorian, it just seems incredibly odd to me because The Mandalorian clearly grew up during the Clone Wars. His parents were killed during the Clone Wars, and yet he doesn't seem to really understand what the Jedi are. Like, he's very taken aback. That conversation he has with the blacksmith, he really just has no idea what the Jedi are. He's kind of taken aback about finding these, I think that's the mystics that you were talking about. Like, that's kind of the line that the Mandalorian uses, is like, you want me to find these crazy, like, wizards or whatever, like he just seems to know absolutely nothing about them. And even the way the blacksmith talks about the Jedi is as if they're from like centuries in the past, which they are, but they didn't go away centuries ago in the past. They went away like, what is it? By the time of The Mandalorian, it's like 25, maybe 30 years ago. It's not that long. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it hasn't been that long at all.
Yeah, so that's where I think it kind of gets a little weird. James Stone mentions, I always thought the Jedi in Mando's era were looked at as a myth, like how Han is a non-believer of the Jedi, like in New Hope. And that's exactly what we're talking about, James, is that idea that, at least for some fans, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems that they would have more knowledge of the Jedi simply because, again, it hasn't been that long since the Jedi stopped functioning, since the Jedi stopped being the guardians of peace in the galaxy. It just hasn't been that long.
Well, like I said, I'm curious to see what they decide to kind of sync up and connect, and what they decide not to. Um, and but my overall hope, in all honesty, is that they don't really worry with this too much until they're getting close. You know what I mean, to sort of wrapping it up. I would enjoy just continuing to explore the kind of elements and the things that they've been doing with so far. Because I do still like the idea too. Like we keep talking about, what's the ultimate fate of the child. I do like the idea that we could see, Luke in some capacity. You know what I mean? Eventually winding up with the child, at the Jedi, the new Jedi temple or whatever. But at the same point too, that's kind of sad when you consider like what eventually happened there. So I don't
Exactly.
know. They're gonna have to figure out what their future Star Wars story is, and the role that these characters will play in it. But I wouldn't put it past anyone that, in all honesty, that maybe at the end of the day, it's not connected to any of that stuff. It's its own separate thing. So much in the same ways, like for example, you were talking earlier, Eric, about the Ewok specials. They don't really sync up, necessarily, in an obvious sort of way, to
They don't
the
sync
other
up at
movies.
all.
Yeah,
It doesn't
so
make, because actually the Ewok specials are supposed to take place before Return of the Jedi. And that doesn't make any sense because Wicket can speak, the common tongue of the galaxy,
right,
and he can't speak it in Return of the Jedi. So the
yeah,
continuity doesn't make any sense. No, that to me, the Ewok movies should be definitely just viewed as their own little world. The Ewok cartoon should be kind of viewed as its own little world. And by the way, the Ewok cartoon is supposed to take place before Return of the Jedi. You know what I mean? Again, in
right,
terms of continuity. And actually, we kind of we touched on this a little bit. I think that was one of the problems with Droids was supposed to take place before the original Star Wars film. And a lot of fans, even as a kid, I was kind of like, this doesn't seem to fit. I mean, this doesn't,
yeah. It
I don't,
doesn't make
you know
sense.
what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
I could see this maybe like happening after Star Wars, like after Return of the Jedi, and then all these kooky adventures and stuff. Like, I'm like, no, this doesn't seem to fit to me with like the other three movies I just saw. You know what I mean? Like this cartoon doesn't seem to fit. And I think a lot of fans kind of had that reaction. So yeah, I think you're right. In terms of those things, they definitely kind of are there, even though they officially fit within the continuity in a certain way, it never really made sense. And
right,
maybe the Mandalorian ultimately is going to be like that too. It's going to be like, well, the Mandalorian is supposed to be 5 years after Return of the Jedi, 25 years before The Force Awakens. But in reality, it's just its own thing. It's just going to do its own thing and doesn't really care about, definitely doesn't care about The Force Awakens. And it's only kind of, faithful to the original trilogy because it's going to kind of just do its own thing. I could see that. I could see that.
yeah. I could see it too. And then we do have some additional comments here, real quick. Peggy makes a comment. Didn't Anakin destroy the library? If they have no written history anymore, then the next generation isn't going to be taught, and the Republic would have done their best to stop knowledge from being taught. I could see that. Knowledge is power.
I think she means the Empire, by the
Right,
way.
yeah.
The Empire would have done their best to stop knowledge from being taught.
Right. And then she says, knowledge is power, and not teaching the youngsters, then the educated keep their power. Well, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Like I said, you never know. The Mandalorian may actually answer some of these questions during the course of the show. That would be interesting. Kind of in the same way that Rogue One, I think, kind of showed us aspects of A New Hope, the original Star Wars film, that I personally had never thought of. It kind of filled in some interesting gaps. It's like, oh, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I don't know. We'll see.
No, I could see the Empire like banning like even the word Jedi, like saying the word Jedi is illegal. Like I could see something like that within the universe. That does make some sense. I just don't know if it would be that effective in 20 years. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Are we good to move on to another story?
Absolutely.
Cool. I've got one pulled up if you don't mind. So, This is. Let me just start by saying this is rumor, rumor. Can I say rumor anymore? This is purely rumor. I don't know how true this is. Okay, this could be totally fictional and not be happening at all. Okay, so everyone's been warned. So we should look at this as fun fiction to speculate on, and that's it. Because there's not a lot of to back this up. But I just found it terribly interesting. I thought it'd be worth taking a minute or two to discuss. So this is coming from the Cultured Nerd. They're saying that this story they have here is exclusive to them, which should make us be even more fearful if it's true or not. But it says HBO Max wants Affleck, Leto, and Manganiello for an original Batman project. Now, this to me sounds like that there's some interest in maybe what Affleck was originally intending to do with his Batman film. Because there's been a lot of talk that Manganiello was supposed to play Deathstroke the Terminator and basically be fighting Batman. That's what Affleck's script was all about. And when I originally heard it, I wasn't too keen on it, but I did warm to the idea quite a bit. So I thought, it's worth interesting to talk about. And so this story here is from TJ Bravo. And they posted this actually, looks like today. I just found this really interesting. So it says the bat is not dead. Don't bury it. So sources close to TCN have confirmed that HBO wants Ben Affleck, Jared Leto, and Joe Manganiello for an original Batman project. This follows reports last week that AT&T and Warner Media want Affleck to return as the Cape Crusader, and I'd heard that on a lot of different projects, to be honest. Affleck is also in talks to return to the director's chair and to adapt his original script with Zack Snyder producing. So this builds on the release the Snyder Cut idea, obviously, and there is this groundswell of people who quite enjoyed some of the DCEU films and wanting to see the whatever they originally intended to see that actually come to fruition. There's a big movement right now. There's a group of people that they want to see the original version of what Suicide Squad was supposed to be. What the director had originally intended versus the film that we actually got. And there's even been some talk, too, that even the director of Birds of Prey has discussed the fact that they had some issues with Birds of Prey with, Warner execs and whatever meddling with the production. At the end of the day, they are paying the bills. So they do get to make the decisions. That's, sort of the battle as a creative professional is trying to maintain your creative vision and see your idea through, even when people at times seem to be working against you. So it says here, the return of Affleck's Batman will either be a miniseries or a DC film on HBO Max, as Warner Brother is committed to Matt Reeves' The Batman trilogy in theaters. Affleck's project will likely follow the intended storyline teased by the post-credits scene of Justice League or Zack Snyder's Justice League. So again, we should look upon this purely as rumor. I don't know how much you can put into this, but I thought it'd be something interesting to bring up because I've heard a lot of different discussion and excitement kind of surrounding the Zack Snyder cut and the possibility that there could be sort of like this DCEU thing happening on HBO Max for those people that are into it. Well, let me just tell you right now, this is further ammo for me to sign up for HBO Max when it actually happens. Okay. Notice I said when it actually happens, because that's kind of the problem. It's like, I love the idea of the Zack Snyder cut, but I don't feel like shelling out that money right now when there is no Zack Snyder cut of Justice League to go watch. Now, if this comes to fruition, I'm very interested to see this. I remember when Ben Affleck was teasing that leaked footage of Manganiello or possibly even the stuntman in the Deathstroke suit, and he's walking out of that aircraft. It looked like, in all honesty, it looked like that bat plane thing that they were using actually in Justice League. It looked like Deathstroke was actually walking off the ramp. And at the time, I'd heard all these crazy rumors that Batman actually had Deathstroke the Terminator helping him run down leads to actually assemble the Justice League, that the Batman had actually hired him. And so when Manganiello's character actually shows up later and he's talking to Lex Luthor, part of the reason Lex Luthor sought him out is because he knows, or he's been sort of like a double agent and been gathering information for Lex Luthor about what Batman is doing or what Bruce Wayne is doing, essentially. So we'll have to see, because all that sounds really interesting. And then, for example, there's all this talk that Suicide Squad, there's these rumors going around that was Suicide Squad that was actually supposed to happen, is that the big villain at the end of the movie is not really just supposed to be Enchantress and her brother, but that they were actually supposed to bring or somehow cause Steppenwolf to actually come into our world, and it was going to help set up the events more directly for Justice League, for example. And then when they decided to abandon some of what they were doing in Justice League, they decided just to scrap all of that. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But if HBO Max decides to put some money in this, get Ben Affleck back in the director's chair, get him back in the bat suit, and actually, get the opportunity to take his original Batman idea and film it, I'd love to see it. I was very curious to see what Ben Affleck was going to do with it. I think he's a talented filmmaker, and I enjoyed a lot of his films. I still talk about The Town. The Town's a great movie. I really liked Argo. I know he's a big Batman fan, so I would be curious to see what his idea of a Batman movie is. So if it turns out to happen, I'm down. If it's just all rumor, well, it was fun to discuss for a few minutes this evening. So what do you think about this crazy rumor, Eric, this idea that HBO Max may or may not, be looking to actually assemble this, killer's row of people to help bring Ben Affleck's Batman script maybe to life?
I don't think this is surprising at all. I think that this is exactly how things are done in Hollywood. They leak things like that to see what kind of reaction they get. And this is not happening in a vacuum. This is happening in the wake of the Snyder Cut. So what I could kind of see, and I didn't know about this story until you brought it up, but what I can see is this idea of a Snyderverse. So I can see that if the Snyder Cut is successful and does what HBO Max is hoping that it's going to do, the DCEU can remain in the theaters because that is actually doing well. Wonder Woman did well. Aquaman did well. Birds of Prey didn't, but Birds of Prey is whatever. It is what it is. But I think that they recognize that the DCEU, the direction that it's in, I think they're okay with. And what they're looking at is, on HBO Max, could we have our own version of the DCEU? And for lack of a better term, the Snyderverse. So that's the scenario I'm seeing right here. To me, it's all laid out. The blueprint is very obvious. Is that if the Snyder Cut is successful and tons of people come in, and get HBO Max to get the Snyder Cut, and it does really well, and the fans love it, then totally I could see them doing something like this and bringing Ben Affleck's Batman back and doing this whole thing. And again, it would be basically the Snyderverse, and it would be HBO Max's own DC property. You know what I mean? It would be, because we talked about that last week. There's all sorts of huge omissions of DC content on HBO Max because of DC Universe. So DC Universe has all that stuff, and HBO Max has virtually nothing as far as the wide catalog of DC properties, because most of it's on DC Universe. They're competing with themselves. And so this makes perfect sense. HBO just basically they're basically kind of like the CW. They have their own DC Universe on the CW. This would be like, cinema quality, DC Universe for HBO Max, because DC does this all the time. This is what Time Warner does. I don't understand it. I've never understood it. I like the MCU model better, and I am a DC guy. I prefer the DC characters over the Marvel characters, but I love what Disney has done with the MCU. What Marvel Studios started and Disney has continued, where they integrate everything together. Even the Netflix shows had references to the battle in New York and all that kind of stuff. That it all ties in together. S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually on tonight, which is crazy to me that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is still going on ABC. And technically that falls within the continuity of the Marvel movies as well. But DC doesn't do that. Or I should say Time Warner doesn't do that. Or should I say AT&T doesn't do that? Depends on how you look at it, right? who the overlord is right now. But they don't do that. Gotham had nothing to do with the CW shows. In fact, the CW shows didn't have anything to do with Supergirl at first, because Supergirl was on a different network and didn't come to the CW until later. And then, of course, Supergirl is technically in a different universe than the other CW characters, because the CW with Flash introduced the whole multiverse thing. And so it's like, yeah, Time Warner keeps doing this. So I can totally see this. I can totally see this is the beginning of the Snyderverse. If the Snyder Cut does well, HBO Max is going to have their own DC universe.
And just to back up what you were saying about CW, the Crisis event basically put them all in the same universe. So Supergirl,
when it first came out, Supergirl was on a different network. It was not part of the CW at all. It wasn't until it got canceled, I think it was on CBS, they moved it to the CW, then they incorporated it into Flash, but still, she was in a different universe than Flash was. When Flash meets Supergirl, because I saw that, he's like, oh, who are you? Well, who are you? You know what I mean? Because they're from different universes. And then, of course, like, I didn't watch the Crisis event, but you did, and we covered it on the show. So I know what happened. But what I'm saying is that's what DC does, just like Gotham. Gotham had nothing to do with the CW or Supergirl or the movies or any of that stuff. It was just off on its own. You know what I mean? On doing its own little thing. And that's the same way that, Time Warner does that. That's what they've always done. It feels like that's what they're always going to do. And it just makes complete sense to me that they would want to create their own DC universe on HBO Max. And then they don't have to deal with any of that. Like, so DC Universe can be doing its thing. CW can be doing its thing. You know what I mean? Because that's just the way they operate. They've always operated that way. And then the movies can be doing their thing.
Right. And then James does bring up a comment. He says, rumor, Dave, with a question mark. And yes, James, like I said, this is purely rumor. This is and a little bit of speculation. Like I said, I don't know how much I'd put into this. If this is coming from Variety or Deadline or something, I'd be like, wow, this must be really happening in some form. But I also know, like Eric was just talking about, a lot of times they leak these things on purpose because they want people to talk about, to see how much interest there could be in this potential project. Because, the HBO Max thing is so interesting because basically they launched without a lot of unique original content exclusive just to their service. They just launched with a bunch of stuff that previously a bunch of other people had. They just kind of took it all back. So they don't even have a Mandalorian show that they can hang their shingle on, as far as I know. I know they do have a few things that they're doing, but it's not catching on or causing a lot of attention. I see more people complaining about Space Force still than I hear them talking about HBO Max. So, and Space Force is on Netflix. So there you go. There's Netflix still winning at the end of the day. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I personally had heard a lot about what was going on with Ben Affleck's Batman project for some different people that I kind of knew. And everything that was getting back to me had me excited to see it. So then all of a sudden overnight, it just kind of all came to a screeching halt. It was just like, what? They've spent a lot of time developing all this. They've been shooting test footage. Like, what do you mean they're not doing it? Like I said, I would love to see what Ben Affleck's intention was, for his Batman script. I personally would just like to see what he intended to do. And like Eric said, if they do their own Snyderverse that exists on HBO Max, I don't think that's any harm nor foul. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just its own little thing. It sits over here with the Zack Snyder version of Justice League. Those people who enjoy it and want to discover it, well, here you go. It only costs X amount of dollars per month to go check it out. So I don't know. We'll have to see. And then there's been all kinds of crazy rumors. I didn't want to get into them swirling around about the Matt Reeves Batman project. It has me a little concerned. And then there's, of course, all the insanity going on with Batwoman, which I was going to bring up during the pop culture news segment, but I decided, for sake of time, I don't know how far I want to get into that. But and then that's unfortunate too. I think we actually broke that in the last episode where we talked about Ruby Rose actually leaving Batwoman. But now there's all this crazy stuff that they're not going to recast someone to play Kate Kane. There's talk that they're just going to bring in some other character, and that person's just going to assume the mantle of Batwoman, kind of like what they did with Firestorm. And
I saw that. I saw an article on that as well, by the way. That they're just going to it's going to be a new character.
Yeah, it's going to be its own thing, which is fine, but I talked about that in the last episode too, that how I felt that was kind of unfortunate because the version of Firestorm that exists in Legends of Tomorrow, I don't remember if I talked about that here on the show or I talked about that. I might have talked about that because I did an interview over the weekend. Maybe it was during that interview I did over the weekend. But I had talked about the fact because someone had asked me how I felt about Firestorm and Legends of Tomorrow. And I said that it was kind of fun to see Firestorm and Legends of Tomorrow for the brief period that it was a version of Firestorm that I had any association with whatsoever. I said, but by the time that they were done, the version of Firestorm that was on Legends of Tomorrow was an interesting character, but it wasn't Jason Rush, nor was it Ronnie Raymond. So I didn't have a lot of interesting insight on that character. It was its own unique thing just to Legends of Tomorrow, even though he was bonded with Professor Martin Stein. So I don't know. That's the thing that's interesting. The DC stuff is definitely a mess compared to how Marvel is able to kind of get all their ducks in a row and connect things and have things kind of play through on ideas and always build. They're always building on their own universe, which is really interesting. But then, use the multiverse excuse or whatever, DC is not afraid at the end of the day to just throw things at the wall. But it's so funny because it wasn't always like that. You roll back the hands of time just a few years ago, and there was literally mandates that would have prevented any of this stuff from happening. You would not have characters referencing Batman in a direct way on a CW show when you had Batman films in active production that were going to be coming to theaters. It would not have allowed that. So I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what their eventual thought is. So yeah, like I said, I thought it'd be interesting to bring up to discuss. So, because like I said, it is mostly rumor. So,
well, Bobby Chambers says seeing a separate DC run could work. Marvel had great success on Netflix. Just replace Leto with Defoe, and I'm sold. I am not a fan of Leto's Joker at all. I hate his Joker. That's just my personal opinion. I do not like that version of the Joker at all.
Well, and there's a lot of, in all honesty, Bobby, there's a lot of people that could bring into play the Joker for this particular production. I think a lot of people would welcome the opportunity. So we'll have to wait and see. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even know, even after reading this, I don't even know how much interest Leto would have for coming back to even play the Joker at this point, considering some of the things that we heard was being said in the wake of Joaquin Phoenix's Joker movie.
Yeah, the rumor is that he was pretty upset about that.
Yeah,
he was totally sidelined, and that he was pretty butthurt. He was pretty upset about that whole situation, and in some ways, I can actually understand that. From a business angle, and from him being an actor and him thinking that this is going to be his part for a while, and he would get at least like one shot. You know what I mean? To really play the Joker on his own in a film. I think that's kind of what they led him to believe because of what we're looking at right now. This idea that maybe the Ben Affleck Batman would come back and Leto would play the Joker. I think that was the original plan. I just think that the reception was lukewarm at best. A lot of people hated him as the Joker, and I think that's why they went in a completely different direction, which I thought was brilliant. I mean, the direction they went in, I thought we reviewed the Joker, and I think that's an awesome film, and it was totally the right way to go. But it is what it is. So could they try to bring him back in this scenario? Could they mend some fences? It's possible. Hey, if the money's right, If the money's right, it could totally happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then let's see here in the comments. Peggy is talking about some of the different shows.
Well, she did mention this. I thought was interesting because she was talking about Supergirl being part of the same universe, which we already mentioned, and she said sorry for spoiling that, but we already talked about that anyway. We did mention that Supergirl is part of that universe now. He said, but I was reading that because of how bad Green Lantern did, that actually influenced Arrow, and they couldn't call him the Green Arrow for 4 years, and the Flash went to visit the Lantern's hometown, but couldn't mention him at all, which is interesting. The idea that because I hadn't heard that because the movie performed so badly that there was some sort of a ban on even saying Green Arrow. Although I will point out, some people miss it, but it stuck out to me when they in Justice League they do mention lanterns. In fact, and there's obviously a reference to one of the other Green Lanterns fighting in that big battle from antiquity. There's clearly a Green Lantern type person. There's clearly like a Captain Marvel, Shazam type of figure that were involved in this ancient battle with who's the villain in Justice League?
Steppenwolf.
Steppenwolf. That there was a fight with him, and there's obviously a Green Lantern there, and there's obviously someone that was related to Shazam. You know what I mean? So that those figures are obviously there, but I don't think. But they say lanterns. I think they even that's the term they use. Like they say no lanterns, and they don't say no Green Lanterns. They say no lanterns.
Yeah. Which to me it makes sense. I don't know that they would say no Green Lanterns. The fact that they would just say no lanterns here, because you have to remember that in the wake of Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern, which was so great, there's more than just the Green Lantern now. There are all these other lanterns that power all these different aspects and entities that kind of harken back to, for those of you who are not terribly familiar with the DC universe, harken back to the similar concepts that they played with the Infinity Stones in the Marvel movies. It's a similar kind of idea, which the DC version of that idea, in extent or not, is in some ways even older. But no, it'll be interesting to see. But I remember actually when they had, I think it was in one of the movie trailers, he actually makes that comment. Steppenwolf says, "No lanterns here." And so that's because the lanterns obviously are the sort of like the intergalactic space force. They are the protectors, of the universe. They're the ones that make sure things don't get out of hand on all these different planets. So I hope that they'll introduce the Green Lanterns, into all of this. I've heard all kinds of crazy rumors that there was supposed to be a lantern more kind of obvious in the Zack Snyder version of Justice League. So we'll just have to wait and see what comes out of all of this. But it'll be interesting. And DC, well, not DC so much, but Warner's is at times they can be a little reactionary to things. I think that's pretty obvious now. I think everyone's kind of seen them do that in real time with some of these movies. So we'll see what actually comes of it. But I like the idea of being able to see this because I was very curious because I do think of all the characters that Batman could square off against, I think Deathstroke makes an interesting foil because in some ways they are somewhat similar. And it would be interesting to see that showdown kind of go down between the two of them in a live action film. And then DC, Peggy has another comment about DC. She says DC has had so many issues because they have spread out their licensing options that one show couldn't even mention another character because someone else owned the rights. Well, that's true, but it even gets more complicated than that because a lot of the different offices, at least at one time, had a lot of say what happened with those characters and other media and sometimes other properties. For example, Superman was supposed to actually guest star in 2 different little story arcs that happened in Grifter, one of the books I worked on. And it flipped your wig to realize that or flip your lid to realize that Superman was supposed to be in those books. And then at the last minute, the decision was, no, we're not going to do that. And so we ended. It's so weird because I've had a few people ask me, they said they thought it was weird that Grifter fought Midnighter twice. And it's like, well, that's because it was supposed to be Superman both times. And our book wasn't the only book affected. There were other books affected where literally Superman had already been drawn on the page and they were whiting him out and putting someone else in. So it's not uncommon for that to happen, Peggy, but it's usually a more broad stroke sort of thing. They just determine that for whatever reason, this character is too valuable for this thing. We're going to sit it over here until we know what we want to do with it. And I think we've seen them do that even with Henry Cavill's Superman. It's the same thing. They weren't really sure what to do with it, and they decided to sit it aside. But now it seems like they figured something that they want to do with him. So there's a lot of rumors and talk that maybe they may be bringing Henry Cavill's Superman back out and doing some other things with it. So it'll be curious to see.
There's a great example of this in terms of Man of Steel. Man of Steel doesn't have so much as an Easter egg. They don't even have like a throwaway comment about Gotham or something like that. There is no reference to the wider world. And I remember when Man of Steel came out, and of course the MCU was running well, and fans brought that up. And they talked about the fact, well, what about Batman? What about Wonder Woman? What about all these other characters? I remember the comment was made. I can't remember if it was Snyder or if it was one of the producers. But they actually said, well, DC characters don't really need that. Like, they were kind of trying to trash Marvel a little bit because there's always that Marvel DC, rivalry. It's like, they can stand on their own. They don't really need, that wider thing. And then, of course, it was like, take foot out of mouth, because then the next thing you know, Batman versus Superman and the beginning DCEU was announced, within like a couple weeks. But the film itself was not made with that intention. And that was obvious. Those comments were made at the time that there was no intention to reference the wider DC universe. It's just DC does weird things like that. They've always done weird things like that. And I don't think it really has anything to do with licensing because they have their own studio. They are part of Warner Brothers. They are part of Time Warner. They just make weird decisions like that and always have. They've always done that. And I don't understand it. I think it's really strange. And it's neat to have you talk about your experience, Dave, since you worked for DC and what happened on a actual DC comic where basically they said, nah, you can't use our character because, we just don't want you to use that character, even though we own it and this is an official DC comic. Nah. But they did let Superman fight He-Man. They did do that, which shocked me because I didn't realize it at the time. But they did, when we did that review of the He-Man documentary on Netflix, that's when I learned that they did let Superman fight He-Man because DC had the rights for the Masters of the Universe comic book. So that makes sense. In a lot of ways it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But then they won't let Superman be in Grifter. DC does weird things like that, for no real good reason, in my opinion. No real good reason. Yeah. Just like Man of Steel. Man of Steel could have set up Batman versus Superman. It could have been the first step in the DCEU, but it wasn't. There is not one reference to Wonder Woman or Batman or anybody. You know what I mean? The only thing you get, the only Easter egg you get is Luthor. There's a Luthor Corps truck, and that's part of Superman's thing. I mean, that's not part of the wider DC universe.
Well, there is a satellite. There's a Wayne Enterprises satellite that is destroyed in the midst of their battle, but you got to kind of be paying attention to see it.
Really?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it's pretty well known at the time. I didn't really see it, and someone else pointed it out to me, and I went back and watched it. I was like, oh, you could see the Wayne Enterprises logo on it. But no, yeah, DC does that.
You sure that wasn't added later?
No,
you sure that wasn't like added for the home, for the home release or something like that? That was in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, because it was. I remember seeing it in the movie theater. And then someone pointed it out because I saw Man of Steel in the theater actually a couple times. So I know I know a lot of people don't like that movie. I didn't hate it. I felt like again it was a bit of a missed opportunity at times, and I thought it had some interesting ideas. The problem with DC at the end of the day, in all honesty, with the films, a lot of times is they try to do too much too quick. They're not willing to let things kind of build properly, and they just want to go straight for the throat. That's usually the problem.
They said it. I can't remember if it was Snyder himself or one of the producers. It was at Comic-Con. They directly said, "Oh, we don't do that. We don't need to do that. DC doesn't need to do that. We don't need to have our characters together. We just do them one alone because they're basically better than Marvel characters. They don't need anybody else. They can stand on their own." And then, of course, the very next film, we're going to have Batman versus Superman. I mean, it was really like that. It was just so like, God, man, really? Really?
But yet, for some reason, even though they'll make that comment, I keep bringing this up because I keep thinking it's such a simple little thing. But if that had been Morgan Freeman in that Wayne Enterprises building at the beginning of Batman v Superman, and he was playing Lucius Fox, even though we don't understand how his Lucius Fox directly connects to Ben Affleck's Batman, it doesn't matter. If that had been Lucius Fox and Batman had been distraught trying to get to Lucius Fox and Lucius Fox had died, you know what I mean? That would have been huge. Yeah. I think people would look at Batman v Superman differently because even though that moment technically, quote unquote, would not have been genuinely earned, right? There would have been these people that had been able to make that connection and went, okay, well, maybe the Christopher Nolan Batman films are a little bit of a setup for this Ben Affleck version of Batman. Then all of a sudden, these ideas that they say, well, we don't have to delve too far into the history to make the connections. All of a sudden, it kind of makes sense because I keep bringing up the idea of missed opportunities. That the fact that it was just some faceless Wayne Enterprise executive that we'd never heard of, we'd never seen before, and Bruce is supposed to somehow care, it doesn't really quite work. You sense Bruce's outrage, and that scene is so powerful where he's racing around the city and you see the destruction, and you sense the idea that he feels kind of hopeless, or helpless, you know what I mean, in that moment. And that's not a feeling Batman handles very well. And then he realizes that there's this new threat. He's got to find a way to deal with this. It makes a lot of sense, but I'm telling you, you pay Morgan Freeman whatever he wanted to just be in that one scene right there, and it's Lucius Fox, and all of a sudden everybody would look at that movie completely differently. It would change it so much because all of a sudden something that wasn't genuinely earned would now feel earned because people would be like, oh, they killed the guy that made all of Batman's stuff and they were good friends. All of a sudden the rage and the outrage, the anger, and then all of a sudden you just change a couple of lines of dialogue between him and Alfred because Alfred knew Lucius too. You know what I mean? It's like all of a sudden it's there, all of a sudden the connections are there. Even though you didn't really set that up properly, everyone understands what you're talking about now. And now all of a sudden his rage and his anger makes sense. I don't know. I still don't know.
Yeah, I think that would have worked very well. That definitely could have connected it very well.
Yeah. I'm definitely falling behind some comments here in the Rogues Gallery.
Well, PJ, he's in the house. Orville Nation, always good to see you, PJ. And he says, "I agree, Dave." So he's backing you up on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just how I feel about it. Are we good to move on from this crazy Batman rumor story I brought up?
I think we moved on from the story a while ago, but
okay,
we've kind of been all over the place.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, there was an older comment from Man of Sam because you touched on Space Force, and he was saying, speaking of Space Force, do you plan to do any coverage or reviews of that Netflix series? And Man of Sam, we haven't discussed it. We haven't discussed Space Force at all. So if that's an official request, we will absolutely consider it, because we will consider requests from anybody in the Rogues Gallery of something that you think we should review. So if you think we should review it, we'll look into it, because we've got what, 3 more episodes or 2 more episodes of Disney Gallery, right?
Yeah.
So once Disney Gallery is done, we're going to be looking for something, quote unquote, new or newer to review. If you want us to review Space Force, you're probably number 1 on the list after Disney Gallery at this point. You know what I mean? As far as things for us to review. So if you want us to take a look at Space Force, we both have Netflix. That's definitely within the realm of possibility.
And just in full disclosure, I'm about 4 or 5 episodes into Space Force right now. I just turned it on because I wanted to have on. I've been working on a movie project. I can't say more about it at the moment, but I have been working on a movie project. It's been taking up a truckload of time, and I was looking for something to have on while I was working, which if I look exhausted, because I haven't had a lot of sleep. But anyhow.
Well, PJ says he's going to be reviewing Space Force too. So, and PJ, we have talked about trying to do some more collaborations. So we had mentioned the possibility of an Orville comics or something like that, but maybe that's something else we can look into. If you're doing a review on your show, maybe Davis, since he's already seen some of the episodes, maybe the two of you could collaborate on that as well. That's another possibility there. So, because we definitely are looking to do more stuff with you, PJ. So that could be a possibility as well, I think.
Yeah, I would be down for that. Like I said, I'll save my comments for it if we actually review it. So, but yeah, I'm about 4 or 5.
That would be good. Let's avoid the Dave spoilers. I'm gonna put I need to make a graphic. You know what I mean? I'm just gonna start flashing it on the on the show from now on.
I didn't say anything.
I need that 5-second delay button and just, you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna make it happen. Because you've hit me a couple times too, regardless of what the audience thinks. You've hit me with some spoilers a couple times, so it's like, hey, I know you want to talk about it, but hold off until we get to watch it. You know what I mean? And then
yeah.
I agree about it all you want. Although I will say, I think this is fine. PJ is asking if you like it. Do you like it?
I kind of like it. I don't quite get some of the vitriol for it, to be honest. But that's just, like I said, that's just my fast take. I don't want to get too farther into it. Just the general impression. But I mean, it's well, like I said, we'll have to wait to review it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But no, overall,
don't get him started, PJ.
Yeah.
I'm shutting that down right now. Don't get him started, man. I haven't seen it. It's not fair. I have not watched a single episode. So,
all right. So there you go. Now we're about 2:27, 2 hours 27 minutes. Do we want to segue over into streaming wars and do a little bit, or do you have anything else you want to do for pop culture or?
Time wise, I don't think we can do anything more for pop culture. I think
I was thinking the same thing. So.
Although Peggy asks if you guys are watching Vagrant Queen, and I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so I am familiar with Vagrant Queen. I was actually considering reading the graphic novel series, or the comic series that it's actually based upon, and then getting further into it because I thought it looked kind of interesting to me. But I haven't delved too far into it just because, in all honesty, I've just got too much going on at the moment. It's one of those things. I have a bad tendency to overcommit myself to too many things all at once. So between trying to line things up with the second issue of the Retro Rogues magazine, I'm trying to keep up with Red Skirts. We haven't talked about it, but Red Skirts is still in active production. I'm still actively working on pages for Red Skirts. Eric has actually seen some of it. And at the same time, too, I also have this side project I picked up because I'm trying to get some things together for some additional things I want to actually do that would help support the show. we'll hopefully be talking about those down the road. So I've just got too much going on. So, but I was very curious to check it out because when I wasn't too terribly familiar with the comics or the graphic novel series it's based upon, but someone brought it to my attention and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I actually have it in my queue of things to look at. Actually on Comixology, that's how I read most of my comics right now. I've been reading them on Comixology. It's actually in my queue of things to look at. But also number two, I wanted to do this coverage actually and delve into the comics greatest world stuff. And I'm still getting all that stuff together. I've actually discovered that there's actually time at the comics greatest world project. I've actually discovered that there is actually 3 issues of Dark Horse Presents that actually sets up the world of X prior to Dark Horse's superhero universe. And I didn't realize that. So I'm in the process of trying to run those issues down. I've actually been rereading old issues of Comic Scene magazine and making notes. And I'll just put it out there right now because apparently that's not going to happen. I did reach out to Chris Warner to try and get him to come on the show to talk about Comics Greatest World. I thought it would be fun, but it looks like that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So, so because of everything else I have going on at the same time, I am very curious to check it out. So we'll see, Peggy. I am definitely interested to check it out. So
she says she hasn't read the books, but the show is fun so far. So it's
yeah,
an early feel of Farscape and Firefly vibe.
I liked the trailers I saw for it. It looked really interesting. And like I said, when I heard that it was also based off of a graphic novel series, I was like, oh, now it's on, that's the stuff always really piques my interest because then I'm like, oh, well, I want to go read that and check that out and then go watch the show. So I'm very curious about it. It may be something that we bring up down the road and talk about. But like I said, I've just got too much going on. So I haven't had a chance to get too further into it. There's certain things that I run across it and I realize there's more to it than just the show. I like to dig deep and explore all the different aspects of it and then come to the show and try to develop for my own personal taste and interest, like a broader view of what they're trying to do. So it helps me to appreciate it more. Like, for example, I think I would have appreciated it's that big budget sci-fi film that came out recently. Well, recently, several years ago now. It was a big deal at the time. It's based off of a very popular series that actually comes from Europe. I'm not talking about Dread. And I wasn't terribly familiar with the original comics that it was based upon, and I went into the film, and it kind of left me kind of cold. And then I had some friends come to me or tell me, it's like, well, you should have read the original source material. It's actually not too bad. And I was like, oh, well, now I feel bad. So anyhow, way too much information. How much time have I wasted with all that nonsense? My nonsense, not yours, Peggy. I appreciate you for bringing it up. But my waxing poetic about something I haven't even seen. I just killed 10 minutes of airtime, I think, with it. It's really bad. I'm really bad about that. So anyhow.
I do want to keep putting out, though, if you guys want us to review something, let us know. Okay.
Yeah.
And because I want to review things that you folks are interested in. That's the point of the show. In fact, a lot of times Dave and I, especially with new stuff, we're like, man, I don't know what should we do next? It's nice that we have Disney Gallery right now because that's kind of filling us for a while with some more current content because we are the retro rogues. We like older stuff. You know what I mean? So sometimes the newer stuff falls flat. I'll be honest, the Picard experience, really threw me for a loop. I hated reviewing Picard. I hated it. I got to the point where I was dreading watching that damn show. But I'll do it for you guys. I'll do it for you guys because that's part of our commitment to doing this show is if you want us to review something and you want us to give you give you our take, that's what we're here for. That's the whole point of the show. So if you guys have something, it's not just all about what I like or whatever or what interests me. Let us know, and we would love to take a look at it and see if it's something that we can the biggest obstacle is going to be whether we have access to the service or not. That's really the biggest obstacle, because like for instance, what is that show on? what platform is Vagrant Queen on?
I think it's on Sci-Fi, if I remember.
It's on the Sci-Fi channel.
I think
So
Sci-Fi
it's,
was where I saw it being promoted.
so it's a cable show. So like in that particular instance, I don't have cable, so that could be an issue. You know what I mean? But definitely, please feel free to give us suggestions about content that you would like us to review, and we'll look into it. We'll definitely look into it.
So I'm looking, just out of curiosity, trying to figure out where you could watch it. I'll have to look into it because I thought it was being pushed on Sci-Fi.
And Peggy says she is a fountain of suggestions. So let me know when you're looking for something. And Peggy, we always are. Like I said, we're committed to doing the end of Disney Gallery. We've still got a few episodes left of that comes out every Friday. So that's going to fill our first segment window of more current, newer content for the next 2 or 3 episodes. But then after that, we'll be looking at other material.
So, do we want to segue into streaming wars?
Yeah, I have a real brief one.
Okay.
Did you have anything for streaming wars?
I don't have anything for streaming wars. My weird Batman HBO Max is sort of kind of did both, because if they're actually paying for that, that's again how they're trying to leverage what they're trying to do in the streaming wars. But the irony of it is that that's rumor. Nothing's ready to go. They just kind of walked into the streaming wars with a lot of older content. So that would be my whole point. So
no, that makes sense.
So we'll segue into streaming wars here for probably one news story here with Eric. So on the streaming wars segment, we talk about something that's happening in the world of the streaming wars. Ideally, we're talking about all those available streaming services that exist, including the new HBO Max, but we're also talking about those things a lot of us already enjoy, things like Hulu and Netflix, but also those things that are all those amazing free services that are out there that exist too, things like Pluto, things like Tubi. Anyhow, anything that catches our interest that we think that you might also find interesting or worthwhile to discuss, we cover here in the Streaming Wars. So tell me, Eric, what do you have up for Streaming Wars tonight?
Well, this one's a YouTube story. We haven't talked about YouTube in a little while. YouTube is a player in the streaming wars. This is a Deadline article from May 28th. And the headline reads, Cobra Kai closing in on new streaming home with YouTube poised to release hit series ahead of season 3. So the meat of this article basically is that YouTube has committed to a season 3 of Cobra Kai. And I think Dave and I have wanted to talk more about Cobra Kai because I think both of us, what we've seen of it, we've really liked. And we've really felt that this is the way to do a revival show. Like it's been done very well, very faithful to the source material. But the thing that's really interesting about this particular announcement is that it shows that YouTube is changing gears. In fact, in this article, if I can find the place, it says, questions about the long-term future of Cobra Kai on YouTube arose when the company in late 2018 signaled a strategic shift from subscription video on demand to advertising video on demand model, and away from original scripted programming to double down on unscripted fare. Indeed, every YouTube scripted original to air since then has been canceled, except for Cobra Kai and Lizzie on Demand, starring popular YouTube personality, Liza, it's right, Liza on Demand, Liza Koshy, I'm not familiar with her, which have been reviewed for additional seasons. So if you folks might remember, some people probably don't even remember this, it was YouTube Red, right? YouTube Red was basically YouTube's subscription service, and they had some scripted shows, and basically the cornerstone of that was Cobra Kai. Well, apparently YouTube's getting out of that business. And so they're committed to one more season of Cobra Kai, because Cobra Kai has been a big hit for them, but it's basically their only hit. So they've committed to another season, but Sony who actually makes Cobra Kai, has basically said, well, if you're not going to do another season, we need to get on another platform, because we're definitely going to milk, this cow as long as we possibly can. So they're committed to, continuing the show. So they're having to look for another home for Cobra Kai. And I think in a lot of ways, this is kind of a good announcement. One thing I think is interesting in this article is they talk about moving away from the subscription video on demand to the advertising video on demand, which kind of was always my problem with Cobra Kai from the beginning, which was I always thought, well, why couldn't YouTube just do a show that's just like any other YouTube show and have it based on advertising, so that it's like the Peacock, like the lowest version of the Peacock's going to be coming out, I believe later this month, is when we're finally going to get the free version of Peacock. So, because I think Dave and I are big advocates of these free streaming services. That's part of one of the reasons that we're going to be talking about Krull in our next segment as our Rogues Retro Review, our Rogues Retrospective, because it's available on Pluto right now. So you can watch Krull for free. So I always thought it was kind of weird that YouTube did this sort of weird YouTube Red thing. And it seems like they're kind of giving up on that, and they're conceding defeat. And as far as that avenue of the streaming wars, they do still have YouTube TV, which is an interesting model as well, by the way. They do still have YouTube TV, but it looks like they're getting out of this whole, subscription model as far as their own original content. And I was curious, Dave, if you'd heard about this. You're muted, Dave. You're muted.
My bad. Sorry. I keep forgetting about that. I had actually heard about this. I'd actually read this story prior to you bringing it up. I'd actually read it probably, I don't remember exactly when it was, probably a day or so ago. But I had actually read this story and had actually been contemplating and thinking about this anyway, because we hadn't heard anything about Cobra Kai season 3 too much. I mean, the first season was a big hit, and they made a big deal about rolling out the second season. And I know the second season was a bit of I think a hit or miss, because I don't think everyone who really was all on board for the first season was necessarily all on board with the second season. I know for me, it was just a question of, do I want to pay for another streaming service? Which is a thing I'm often having to ask myself these days. Do I really need that or not? And luckily enough, they'd made a couple of these episodes, if not most of this second season, actually available for free. I was kind of surprised at that for a limited time. So I did get a chance to watch a few of them, but I didn't get a chance to watch all of them because, as usual, I just have too much going on. But I like the idea of Cobra Kai continuing, and I'm curious to see where it winds up. I mean, I hope it winds up on one of these services I already currently subscribe to, because I'd like to be able to see those episodes of the second season I missed, and I would definitely be interested to check out a third season. And I'm not surprised that YouTube is getting out of their pay service, just because I think it has been a bit of a misfire. I don't think a lot of the stuff they've tried to do has really connected with people. And I think it's because people are used to going to YouTube to get content for free, and I think, if they just had to watch some advertising as a part of it, I think they'd be more likely to support what YouTube's been trying to do. So I'm not surprised they're getting out of this, as a business model at all. I don't think it's worked too terribly well for them.
No, that's my impression as well. And I just thought that was interesting in terms of this is in some ways a casualty of the streaming wars. You know what I mean? That basically YouTube is giving up on this front. But I honestly don't understand why they just didn't follow their regular model for a scripted show. That's kind of my main point too. Why couldn't Cobra Kai just be like any other YouTube show and be ad-based and get those tons and tons of views, and be something that they could even have special ads for? They could do special, ad packages for people that wanted to be, have their ad on Cobra Kai. You know what I mean? Have it during the broadcast of Cobra Kai. So I just thought that was interesting, and I do think that from what I've seen of Cobra Kai, which I haven't seen all of it, I think this is definitely the way you do a revival in terms of the respect for the source material, and I think it's done very, very well. The stuff that I've seen has been really, really good. Really,
the first season is absolutely incredible, and then what I
Oh,
saw.
I really like a lot of the second season stuff, honestly, because Kreese is back. I mean, I love it. You know what I mean? That no mercy, man, no mercy. That's I'm all about that, man. All about that. So when he came back at the end of the first season, I just was like, this is awesome. He's back. You know what I mean? So, and Peggy took off. I don't know if she's still here, but she said, "Good night, gentlemen. Let me know if I win the giveaway. Again, thanks for letting me talk. Dave, get some sleep when you can." Bye, Eric.
Bye, Peggy. Thank you for being here and being part of the show. We're probably not doing a sketch card for this evening. No offense to anyone, but I've still got a few more packages I've still got to get into the mail, and I'm having a heck of a time managing my schedule at the moment. But once we get back to it, it'll be a regular thing again, and we'll get everything going. I really don't have that much longer to go on this project, and it should be buttoned up, and things should be returning to a little bit more of normal. My part of the country where I live, they've lifted a lot of the restrictions, so I can get to the post office a little bit easier now. So we should be somewhat back to normal, hopefully very soon. So, or at least the new normal, as they call it. So, are we good to move to our second topic?
Yeah, let me just acknowledge Man of Sand. He says, likewise, I've seen plenty of older sci-fi shows and movies, so maybe I'll put forth some suggestions. Man of Sand, I totally encourage you to do so. If you have any suggestions, again, you mentioned Space Force. If you have any other suggestions of things that you would like us to review, just let us know.
Yeah, most definitely. We appreciate all the suggestions. And like I said, I think Space Force might be something interesting, for Eric and I to discuss, possibly doing actually for the show. So it's a good suggestion. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and segue over to our retrospective, our retro review. We're going to be talking about the film Krull. So I'm going to do the synopsis here, a little bit of brief information, and then we'll just kind of set it up and we'll get into the retro review. So Krull came out in 1983. It was actually rated PG. I was curious about that because that alien monster in this movie always freaked me out. I always thought it was rated higher than PG. I don't know why. So the basic synopsis that's here on IMDb is it says, a prince and a fellowship of companions set out to rescue his bride from a fortress of alien invaders who have arrived on their home planet. And Krull is the name of the planet that the story takes place on. And if you're not terribly familiar with Krull, it's sort of like if aliens invaded sort of, medieval times, sort of. It's a very unusual film. But it stars Ken Marshall, Anthony, Freddie Jones, the great character actor Freddie Jones. I always think of him actually for things like Dune. But Freddie Jones is in this, Francesca Annis, which is interesting. Freddie Jones and Francesca Annis were actually in Dune together, David Lynch's Dune. But it's got a really great cast, mostly British players. Of course, Liam Neeson is in this in a very, very early role for him. This film was directed by Peter Yates from a story written by Stanford Sherman. So let's see, how did I first hear about Krull? The way I first heard about Krull, because as I set it up here just real quickly, in order to do a retrospective, we want to start off by talking about how we first heard about the film. After we discuss that, we'll talk about our initial impressions having originally seen it, and then we'll talk about how we feel about the film actually having recently rewatched it. So as Eric mentioned, Krull is available to watch on Pluto. Pluto is a really great free service. Pluto is one of those in-demand movies that you can actually stream. So if you ever look at the Pluto interface, there's a lot of different options in there. And one of them is actually in demand. So if you go to any of the in-demand content, basically you can watch it without having to watch it necessarily in whatever rotation that they have it on. For example, they have channels dedicated just to American Gladiators, but you can't pick which episode of American Gladiators you specifically want to watch. Any of the in-demand services, however, it's kind of like Netflix or something where you pick it. You go, I'm going to watch this or I'm going to watch that. And that's what you watch, and you watch it basically in your own time. So Krull is one of those available on their in-demand service on Pluto. That is how I watched it, because unfortunately I don't own this on DVD or anything. I was kind of surprised to discover that. I do, however, have a signed copy by artist Brett Blevins of the Marvel adaptation of Krull. I was going to try and reach out to Brett and see about having him come on the show, but it just didn't work out. Anyhow, how I first heard about Krull actually is the comic book. That is how I first heard about Krull. I remember seeing this really creepy poster that's on here, and I was like, what in the heck is this? And I remember being in the grocery store. It was actually a Kroger's. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I remember seeing this creepy thing, and it was the cover of the Marvel Comics adaptation. It was in a magazine format, and I was like, what is this? And I flipped through it, and I thought it looked really interesting, and I talked my mom into buying it for me, and that was actually how I experienced Krull for the first time. I actually read the comic adaptation before I actually got to see the film. The comic adaptation is very faithful to the film. It doesn't really, it's interesting because sometimes with adaptations, especially for films like this during this period in which they would do it, sometimes the adaptation would have stuff in it that wasn't actually in the movie. But the adaptation was very faithful actually to the film, actually recreating a lot of the iconic moments. I remember even in the comic adaptation thinking the Cyclops for me personally was the most interesting character. And then later on when I actually finally got to see the film, which this is the crazy thing, I didn't see this in movie theaters. I did eventually actually see this on VHS. That's the first time that I saw Krull. The thing that sticks with me still to this day that most mesmerized me at that time was the mystery surrounding the weapon, the glaive. But beyond that, just the amazing, beautiful music by James Horner. I was already familiar with James Horner even at an early age because I love the work that he did on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And I recognized his name and could hear a lot of similar cues actually from Wrath of Khan. But I remember just being kind of sucked into this crazy, wild world that they've created. And this, to me, even as a kid, this crazy idea that aliens would sort of invade sort of like, medieval Europe, and all they've got is swords and knives and bows and arrows, and they're trying to fight off an alien invasion. I thought that was a crazy idea, even as a kid. So tell me, Eric, how did you first hear about the movie Krull?
Well, I did want to acknowledge James' comment here. James Stone mentions this was before Temple of Doom. So while not rated PG-13, which started the rating system with the first PG-13 film, Red Dawn, which I didn't realize Red Dawn was the first PG-13 movie. That's interesting. I love that movie, by the way. I actually watch it all the time. But the way that I heard about this was from my brother. I have an older brother, and he saw it in the movie theater. And after he saw it, it was like all he would talk about. And I think he told me every scene. He completely spoiled the movie, which didn't really matter when I was a little kid. Didn't really matter if you spoiled the movie for me because I just wanted to see it. I wanted to see the spectacle. And if you told me that a movie was really cool and you told me all about it, it made me want to watch it. So my brother, he totally was just totally into it, was like mesmerized by it, was a huge fan of it. He saw it in the theater. I didn't. I never got to see it in the theater. But eventually we did get it on VHS. So just like you, I saw it on the small screen. And that was the first time that I actually had an opportunity to watch the film. But I basically knew everything about it already because my brother had basically described every single scene to me and all the different things that stood out for him and all the things that he thought was super, super cool. He really built it up for me because he was just so into that movie. And Manasana mentions that Krull seemed like a sci fantasy mix. And it's kind of funny because that's actually the way I look at Star Wars in a lot of ways. I always say that it's kind of emerging. It's funny because people always think of Star Wars sort of like reviving or even sort of creating the cinematic science fiction craze, and which Krull in many ways is part of. It's a legacy of that. There are comparisons between Krull and Star Wars all over the place. A lot of people say that Krull is just a cheap Star Wars ripoff. And the funny thing is I think Star Wars very much is also sci-fi fantasy. I mean, clearly it is, in many ways. It's not strictly just a science fiction film, although that's the way it's perceived. But this one definitely is sci fantasy. As Dave was mentioning, The premise of it is really kind of unique in a way, in terms of the idea of aliens invading with this very sort of medieval like society. And one thing that did strike me about that is there was at least one one other property or one other show actually that did something similar. And I was thinking about that when I was watching this actually earlier today when I was rewatching it. Although I watch Krull quite a bit. I had already watched Krull, within the last year. It's something that I watch a lot. My brother owns a copy of it. I live with my brother, and he watches it all the time. He showed it to my kids. We all watched it as a family. So I've watched Krull all the time. But one of the things that struck me this last time I was watching it, thinking about this premise, because Dave, you mentioned about the sort of strange premise of the movie. There was actually a classic Battlestar Galactica episode that was very similar. And I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you remember that episode, Dave. There's an episode where they actually go to this planet, and it's like that. They actually live in a castle. The Cylons have taken this planet over, and they're in this castle. And the only people left are basically the family of the king. The family of the king has become this resistance. And it's kind of funny because the head Cylon, who's the same model as like Lucifer, he's one of those, the light bulb Cylons, one of the brain Cylons. He has been lying to the to the Cylon command about the fact that there are still humans on this planet and they're actively fighting him because the Cylons exterminated everybody else. And it's very similar to Krull because in Krull, you get that sense that the humans on this planet are on the brink. That basically they're being massacred and slaughtered all over the place. That the beast is essentially committing genocide on this planet. You know what I mean? At the beginning scene, they mention that they had 300 men when they first headed out to start this alliance, and I counted it. It's like 8 guys left out of 300 guys. You know what I mean? There's like 8 guys left when they actually march up to the castle in the one of the first scenes of the movie. So it is kind of an interesting premise, but I just, when I was watching this last time, I remembered, hey, Battlestar Galactica did this. You know what I mean? They had an episode just like this.
Yeah, I think, wasn't that episode called The Young Lords? I think that was
I don't remember the name of the episode, but that sounds right because they were the Young Lords. It was the king's family. They were the only people left. Everybody else was dead.
Right. And then I have here, for those people who are curious, this is the same copy of the Krull magazine that I actually bought back in the day. This is my original copy. I don't know if you can tell, but it's very heavily read. And then it's actually signed to me by Brett Blevins up here in the corner, who actually did all the artwork on this. And like I said, I've loved this thing ever since I first bought it years ago. And this was the way I first experienced of the film. It's interesting having read this because your imagination always sees things differently versus, when you actually see the film. But no, yeah, it's just crazy cool. But yeah, no, I still have my Krull magazine from back in the day.
That's very cool.
And then Brett actually did the adaptation actually for Dark Crystal, and he also did the one also for Last Starfighter. And Krull and Last Starfighter, I have both of them, and he's was great, nice enough to sign both of them to me many years ago when we first met. So I thought I'd show you it's legit. So there you go.
Yeah, right on. No, that's cool. It reminds me a lot actually of the Battlestar Galactica, comic book as well, because they had my brother has it, the big oversized version of that.
I have the digest size one because they actually cut the panels apart and re-engineered it, and it's like a digest, like little paperback size. But I read that thing so many times, like the front cover and a bunch of the pages fell off. So, but I still have it. I still have my original copy, even though it's just completely falling apart. My Last Starfighter is in pretty bad shape too, because some of the pages and stuff have actually separated. And then I told Brett You know, it's just one of those things. I used to redraw the artwork I would see in these. So I redrew a couple things from Krull, but I redrew a ton of stuff from Last Starfighter when I was a kid. I would just literally just redraw the panels as he drew them. And it's just kind of crazy that he's kind of a friend. So, no, yeah. So that's how we first heard about Krull, and that was our initial, kind of experiences with it. So we want to talk about now specifically. We want to talk about how we feel about the film, having recently rewatched it. So I know you talked a little bit about it, Eric, but tell us a little bit more about how you felt about having just recently rewatched Krull. Did you feel like that it kind of holds up? It's still worth revisiting, or?
Yeah, it's funny, doing a little bit of research for the show. I read the Wikipedia article about Krull, and there's such intense criticism of this film. I mean, like intense criticism of this film. There's people that say it's boring. Obviously, the Star Wars knockoff thing comes up a lot. It was poorly reviewed by Siskel and Ebert at the time. It was critically panned, and it was a box office failure. And it's funny because, remember, like I mentioned, my brother at the time when it came out and he saw it in the theater was just mesmerized by it. He thought it was like the best thing he'd ever seen. And he had seen Star Wars. You know what I mean? He had seen Empire Strikes Back, and he really, really liked it. And so it was really built up in my mind, when I saw it, and it's kind of always stuck with me. It's kind of funny because in one way you would think when something's really built up for you, you're just bound to be disappointed when you see the real thing. And I wasn't. I wasn't disappointed at the time, and I'm not disappointed now. Like I said, I watched this film at least once a year, pretty steadily. It's a film to me that's really enjoyable, and I really enjoy the premise. I think the premise is interesting and unique. Like I said, there is precedent for it. Like that Battlestar Galactica episode has a similar premise, but I've always kind of liked the idea. I even pitched this idea to Dave when we were talking about potentially doing a project together. I've always kind of liked this idea of aliens versus wizards. I've always thought that would be like a really interesting idea, something that you could play around with. There's actually a Dungeons and Dragons module that I was exposed to as a kid. And the funny thing is, I never played Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, but I used to read the books. I used to read the source material. And I had friends who played it, and I got as far as my friends helped me make a character, but I never actually played the game. I played other role-playing games, but not Dungeons and Dragons. But one of my friends, his older brother, he had tons and tons of these Dungeons and Dragons modules. And one of the modules for Dungeons and Dragons was the premise of, an adventure where you found a crashed alien spacecraft. That was actually one of the Dungeons and Dragons adventures that my friend's brother had. And he showed it to me, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. This is such a cool idea to put these things together. You know what I mean? The idea of these, fantasy medieval types, with magic and stuff like that, and they come across a ship from another planet. You know what I mean? I just thought that was an amazing idea. And incidentally, in my research, I found out that a lot of people say Krull was meant to be a Dungeons and Dragons adaptation. That rumor has persisted, and the filmmakers have always said that was rumor, but that rumor has persisted for a long time. That Krull, at least at some point, was going to be an official Dungeons and Dragons tie-in, and I could really see that, especially with that particular adventure module that I'm aware of. But I still enjoy watching it. What's interesting is one of the more positive reviews that I saw said something interesting, which is that Krull is one of those sort of unique movies that's almost made for being on broadcast television. Like it's almost made for cable, because, in high rotation, because you can pretty much watch this movie at any point in the movie, and you don't really have to know anything else that's going on, because each section of the movie is almost like its own little mini movie. Like it almost has like its own little thing, because what it is it's like multiple quests within this movie. In fact, as I was reading that, and then I thought about it, in the context of today, I realized Krull would almost be perfect to be adapted into a video game, like an open world video game, where you could go on all these different side quests, because that's what you do in the movie. In the movie, they go on all these different side quests. And sometimes the quest doesn't work out. Sometimes the quest doesn't go anywhere. For instance, when the quest with the seer, that doesn't go anywhere. That quest is a dead end. And they have, multiple quests within this movie. There's the quest to get the glaive, which is the weapon that you see in the main character's hand here on the screen. There's a quest to get the glaive. And I was thinking, man, this could translate really well into a video game. Like, you try to get the glaive and maybe you fail. Then you have to find some other way to kill the beast because you didn't get the glaive. And then you have the thing with the seer. Maybe in a video game version, you could actually finish that quest and actually do it that way. It was really interesting to me when I thought of it in those terms, because I do think that's one of the unique things about this movie is you pretty much can pick it up anywhere in the story. And because it's basically like all these little mini stories that lead up to the conclusion, you don't really have to see the beginning. But I would say my favorite part is the beginning. I always, there's just something to me when I see this big battle where these one of the forces is totally overmatched. It does remind me of Star Wars, because I've always thought that scene is really interesting, where you see the rebel soldiers are just basically just decimated by the stormtroopers. They're just totally wiped out by them. And this movie has a very similar scene at the very beginning of the movie. In fact, I do remember at the time when the movie came out, there were criticisms that the enemies were almost like too powerful. And some people were like, there's no way that the good guys could have won. I mean, they were totally outclassed. There was no way that they should have won. But I think it's still enjoyable. And I think it still kind of holds up, because again, you can just kind of come into the movie at any point, and you can just watch like one sequence or two sequences, and I think you can get something out of it, even if you don't even like the whole movie. But what do you think, Dave?
Well, I do quite like the film. The one thing that I could honestly say definitely holds up, no matter how you look at it, I would have to say is definitely James Horner's score. His score for this movie is really great. It's really cool too, because James Horner, which was such a fantastic composer, he does a really great job of taking these two ideas, the idea of a sort of a medieval fantasy movie and the idea of a space invading movie, and taking these two ideas and kind of putting them together musically. And then as always with James Horner stuff, the love theme that permeates the film is just incredibly beautiful. So the music, no matter what you think about this film, in my honest opinion, the music still is completely stellar and still great to this day. I don't have it on a CD per se, but there are some great sort of soundtrack channels that kind of exist actually on YouTube. And so if you like the music of Krull, a lot of the score is actually available where you could listen to it just on YouTube, for example. This film to me, having recently revisited, I don't have any different feelings from I had when I first saw it as a kid. I still think it's really fun and interesting. I've always thought it was fun and interesting. Are there kind of moments kind of here and there, there's some stuff with the choreography and stuff I wish was a little bit tighter. But at the same point, this is a very ambitious film. They were trying to do a lot of stuff that in all honesty, I'm not even sure the technology quite existed at that time to really do some of the stuff they were trying to do, and they just went for it.
Oh, they're pushing the envelope for sure.
Oh, yeah.
They were pushing the envelope. And an interesting thing in my research, you talk about the choreography. They mentioned that the choreography was very different when they were developing it and much more elaborate, but they had to change it because of the suits of the Slayers. because those suits are so, when they finally got the suits, they were so difficult for the actors to perform in. They had to completely change the choreography because it was supposed to be, and you can tell from the way that the movie's put together, it was supposed to be very much like a swashbuckling movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was supposed to be like that classic, like back almost to like the 30s and like Earl Flynn and all that kind of stuff. You can even see that with the actor. You can kind of see that in him. You know what I mean? That there's that kind of Earl Flynn kind of vibe that he has. And so it was supposed to be very much like a swashbuckling film, which it still is. But yeah, the choreography had to be changed and basically downgraded quite a bit, simply because the Slayer's suits just didn't work right. You know what I mean? They were just too bulky, and they were made for visuals, not for function, which happens all the time in Hollywood productions where they make costumes that are just not practical. You know what I mean? I will say this though, the one thing that's really interesting to me is we don't see them very much because they pretty much all die. But the knights, their armor looks really interesting to me because as much as it does look like knights armor, it looks like modern knights armor. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't, it almost has like a kind of, I don't know, almost like a futuristic kind of knight. You know what I mean? It's really interesting looking to me. I've always loved that look, and I always kind of, I wish they had more of them because they all die so early in the film, but they have a really cool look. I don't know if you ever noticed that or if you ever thought that as well, but they have like an almost, like I said, almost like a modern look to the knights,
Yeah, they do. And that was one of the things I was also going to mention is that there's a lot of really interesting design work throughout the film. Whether you're talking about the knights, armor for specifically, whether you want to talk about the slayers, which are the main, sort of the muscle of the villain, the beast, whether you want to talk about the beast himself, man, that thing is still terrifying looking to this day. There's a really creepy picture of it in the Marvel Comics movie adaptation, and that thing's disturbed me since I was a little kid. You look at the design of the glaive; it's so interesting. And that's the thing about this film is that there's so many interesting ideas and there's so much really cool kind of stuff, whether you want to talk about gadgets or armor or whatever, that in all honesty, even though I can see some of the flaws that a lot of the other reviewers and whatever can point out throughout the film, I'm still able to just be sucked into the world and just enjoy the film for what it is. Because I love the idea and the concept of what it's trying to do. In a sense, the film I would probably most closely compare this to, and we'll see what Eric's reaction is to this, is I would compare it to Masters Universe, the Dolph Lundgren Masters Universe film. I would compare it to those because they're both kind of similar. They get a lot of similar criticism. A lot of people used to bash Masters Universe for being a Star Wars ripoff. I think that was just the de jour thing to say. If a hero has a magical weapon and takes on an unstoppable force that he should be able to defeat, well, then it's a Star Wars ripoff. But
even though that story is basically as old as time.
As old as time, literally. Literally as old as time. But that would be the film I would most closely compare it to because it does this. It has a lot of similar things, and I find both films really fun and interesting. Because both of those films, they do the same thing. They try to reach beyond probably what they're able to do with their budget, but they just go for it anyway. And you end up with some really interesting stuff. And they're very interesting films to watch. And I agree with what Eric said. I rewatching it, I would have to say it's very true. I could see where, you could just jump into Krull at any point. And if it catches your interest, you're on for the ride. But also, too, I love the idea, because Masters Universe does this as well. I love this idea of taking these sci-fi concepts and mixing them with sort of this medieval folklore, world-building kind of an idea. I think it's really, really interesting, and I've always loved stuff that does that. And there's not many films that do it. You have some films, some other older films that also do it. Whether you want to look at, like, for example, like Sinbad, or you want to look at Jason the Argonauts, to an extent, they kind of play with some of these ideas too. Whether you want to look at Clash of the Titans, the little owl that seems like he's more technology necessarily than magic. But all that stuff's really cool, and I love this stuff, and I think it's interesting. So if you're seeing any of these imagery and you've never seen Krull and you're curious to check it out, the really cool thing about it is that it's available on Pluto. It's not going to cost you anything. It's one of their in-demand features, so you can just go and check it out. And if it strikes your fancy, great. You give it a shot, and turns out that it's not really for you. Feel free to tell us about it next week, because I'd be curious to hear what you have to say. But the one thing I will say, no matter how you look at this film, that music by James Horner is still great. It's still great. It's one of his, in my opinion, it's one of his great scores. And that's saying a lot when you consider that James Horner did the score for, Aliens, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. He won an Academy Award for Titanic. I mean, the guy was incredibly talented. But I would say that Krull is up there because it's just a really, really great score. But no, I think Krull is totally worth revisiting, in my honest opinion. Having just recently rewatched it. Again, I am a little bit closely associated with the film because I kind of grew up with it like Eric did. But that being said, my experience is a little different because I actually read the story before I actually saw the film, and I enjoyed both of them immensely. So we do have some comments actually coming in here, actually from the Rogues Gallery. Let's see here. Let's tackle this one here, definitely by Bobby. So Bobby Chambers says, when I saw Jeepers, I think he means Jeepers Creepers, for the first time, all I could think about was the villain from Krull. Yes, I could see that. This movie has that early 80s sci-fi charm that will always be great. I would agree, Bobby. I would totally agree with that. It's very true. And then James Stone says, Master Universe feels more like Star Trek than Wars, only without the Enterprise crew. Well, I could see that to an extent. I honestly, James, I do really feel like that there's probably a little bit more comparison with Master Universe and Star Wars, in my humble opinion. But that being said, they are, at the end of the day, very different films too. That's the other thing. I feel like sometimes some of those comparisons they're accurate, but sometimes I think the people that use them, they're using it to disparage or put down the film. But I mean it in the broadest context of to build up the film, because I think that Master Universe and Krull, the thing that makes them most unique is that they do take sci-fi and fantasy, those elements, and then smash them together in an interesting mixture. I think Star Wars, in my opinion, is a more pure sci-fi, even though it plays with a lot of concepts that you find in these other films. Whereas these films, and Master Universe, for example, they're not afraid to continue to lean into the things that inspired them. So they feel more medieval at times while also feeling like a science fiction movie. So, and I do agree with what Eric said. I never would have thought of that before. The Colwyn, the lead character here played by Ken Marshall, that he is very much an Errol Flynn, Robin Hood kind of a character. And it's interesting you bring that up because you could definitely see that in the choreography, because in the opening scene where he's swinging back and forth on the rope or whatever, trying to kick them and knock the Slayers down and everything. And I could see, it's interesting. Here's something interesting. There's another connection here too, because when Bill Stout actually designed Skeletor's, not Skeletor's, when he actually designed Castle Grayskull, the interior, there's all these platforms and levels and stuff everywhere, because he imagined that they would have really elaborate sword battles, sort of akin to the stuff that Errol Flynn did, for example, in Robin Hood. He just figured that they would take advantage of that. And because of budget constraints, they had to cut all that kind of short. So even though they have this amazing elaborate set for sword fighting, they don't really do a lot of sword fighting on it, because basically they just didn't have the money or the time to really kind of pull it off. While it's not the same thing as the Krull, where the stunt performers in the Slayer outfits were having a hard time coordinating their movements. It's interesting how both films were intended to have, at least in someone's mind on the production, elaborate sword battles, and for one reason or another, they were never able to quite have their vision.
Frank Langella mentioned in the Masters of the Universe or special, the documentary that we reviewed on a previous episode, that climactic battle at the end, he was really kind of disappointed because, again, it was form over function. He was ready to go. He was in great shape, and he was looking forward to this awesome sword battle that he was going to have with Dolph Lundgren. But when he got the suit, he could barely move in it. You know what I mean? And it was like really difficult. You know what I mean? And he had all sorts of problems, and you could tell he was disappointed with the final result of the scene because he was ready. He was saying, I was ready to go. You know what I mean? And like I said, my research says it was a very similar situation here where the main actor had been preparing for weeks and had gotten all this fight training and was ready to do these crazy scenes. And then the Slayers couldn't move. So it's like, all right, we got to totally dumb this down. You know what I mean? Which I still think it actually works for what it is, because the Slayers obviously are supposed to be intimidating, and they're intimidating to the humans of this planet. You know what I mean? Where obviously that intimidation factor has a big effect on the combat. Plus the fact that they do have basically like blasters, like laser type weapons that they can shoot from a distance and things like that. That puts the humans at a huge disadvantage because they basically only have like medieval technology. So it kind of makes sense, you know what I mean, for the story. But obviously they had meant for it to be much. They'd meant for the fight scenes to be much more elaborate than they end up being in the movie. That's just the
and you can tell just in terms of like that there was a bit of a disconnect, in all honesty, just because when you look at, because Ken Marshall's in great shape for this film, but he's definitely built for a more acrobatic, fast kind of combat, and a lot of the combat they do with the Slayers is kind of more brute force, just head on smashing. And you'd think he'd be built more like Dolph Lundgren, in all honesty, if he'd known that's the kind of battle they were going to be fighting with the Slayers. So it is curious, kind of sometimes how these things work out. But as with all entertainment productions, sometimes, what you want to do and what you end up having to do, a lot of times they don't always sync up, and the goal is hopefully you still create something entertaining at the end. And I would say with Krull, we still have something entertaining and interesting. And for those of us that love Masters Universe, that enjoy, telling and creating stories like myself, I'm always pulling inspiration from things like Krull. For example, these are the kind of things I go to that I enjoy. I don't just go back to, the Odyssey to pull inspiration, but I do. But I also enjoy lifting ideas from things like Krull, because there's a lot of interesting ideas in this film. It was very, very ambitious, this film. Very ambitious, especially for the time. And then James Stone follows up his comment by saying, just real quickly, he said, agreed, just my take, talking about his more Star Trek than Star Wars. And of course, James, we love the idea of all of us having different opinions and talking about them. That's one of the things that makes this fun. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with you. We respect each other's opinions and still have a fun time talking about it. So, and I can see what you're saying, James. I can totally see what you're saying anyway. You made a good point. James also says, I heard the suit on top of them running out of money were the combining factors to the end of Masters. Yes, that was definitely a factor they talked about. They were running out of funds.
That's in the documentary. The documentary, which we did review on a previous episode. They totally said that. Frank Langella totally talked about that.
Yeah. But no, this Krull's a fun movie. It's definitely a fun movie. And if you haven't seen it, revisit it recently, I'd recommend checking it out. Actually thinking it's weird because when I think about Krull, because of these Marvel movie adaptations, I always think of Last Starfighter, and it almost makes me want to talk about Last Starfighter. So we'll see. Or Masters Universe. We keep threatening to talk about the film. I love that movie though, so that'd be a long conversation. So I think the general consensus here, Eric, is Krull is worth revisiting and checking out.
Absolutely. Not again. The effects are a little bit dated. So be prepared for that. Some of the effects are actually done very well and still stand up today. But there are other effects that are very dated that can make it a little bit jarring. it would be cool if they actually did a remaster of this. That would be really neat if they actually remastered some of the effects and kind of updated a little bit.
Yeah.
That would be really cool if they did something like that. I don't think that'll ever happen, but it'd be really cool if they did. And incidentally, this film for me has a really special place because there's a total lead into a sequel for this movie, and the premise of a sequel for this movie. And I think they obviously wanted to do a sequel for this movie, but it never happened because, as I mentioned, it was a box office dud. And one of my things is, if I ever have the resources, I want this to be like my big, like insane project. Like right before they put me in the funny farm and I lose all my money, like I'm going to build this huge fortune. And then right before like my Howard Hughes moment, where I've just gone completely berserk insane, I want to make Krull 2. Not I don't want to reboot this. I want to make the sequel to Krull with like a huge budget, you know what I mean? And just totally do it. You know what I mean? I would just love to see a sequel to this movie, and I would just love to do it, to actually make Krull 2.
Are you talking about picking up that line that they drop at the end of the movie about their son ruling the universe?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. You could tell they definitely wanted a sequel with that. What's interesting too, but weird, is that Marvel adaptation. It's a magazine format. They actually have about 2 or 3 pages, and they talk about all the amazing merchandise that came out of the movie Krull that's going to be available. I don't remember there being a lot of Krull merchandise, so it's kind of a weird thing.
I don't either. Although in my research, I think I saw that there was a board game, which I never saw. I know there was a very popular arcade game. The Krull arcade game was actually very popular and very well received. And I remember it being very difficult because I remember trying to play it. But I remember at the time, every arcade had it. It was a popular game, the Krull arcade game.
Well, I would have to say, in all honesty, I mean, I think that the source material is so interesting for this film. I could definitely see there being interest in like an in-canon, non-rebooted sequel among those of us that quite enjoy the film. But I'd have to say, too, I could see just revisiting this film anyway, just in some sort of context, because I think there's so much material and there's so much stuff that they kind of just mention or that you kind of see. Like, for example, there's a whole origin about where the glaive comes from. Where does the glaive come from? Why does it exist? Who forged it? Why was it, buried away where only the right person could retrieve it? Who was the first person who came across the information of this legend, that led to them actually fighting off the beast? How long has the beast been around? There's a billion questions just from the opening setup of this film that deserve and could enjoy a little bit of exploration. It's interesting is back in the day, that's a lot of times how a lot of these interesting novel projects would come about, is you take a film like this that maybe even wasn't too super popular, but caught on with a group of fans. And a lot of times for TV shows and movies and different projects like this, some of these publishing houses, they would buy these unused scripts, these unused manuscripts or treatments, and they would turn around and have them turned into full-fledged, sci-fi, novels, and then release them out into the world. So if you wanted to continue to enjoy and explore what's happening in this world, there's a way to do that. I think Krull would make an amazing line of actually novels, just exploring the world of Krull. I think there's enough people between the George R.R. Martin stuff and, of course, all the fun sci-fi stuff, whether you're talking about Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever. I think a series of novels actually set in this world that actually explains, where the glaive came from and a little bit more information actually on the beast himself. I could see there being a successful line of novels just celebrating and living in this world.
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that. There is a lot more that you could have with the mythology of this particular universe. You could actually do all sorts of stuff with the prequel because the beast has been enslaving and destroying worlds and things like that. So that there actually is a lot of potential for this particular universe. Yeah,
for sure. And then we do have some suggestions actually over here that sound really interesting. I'd be down for any of those. They all sound really interesting. I'd be down to try any of that stuff.
Bobby does mention that he was going to ask if we would like to see this movie rebooted, but he says he would watch a part 2. Absolutely, he would watch a part 2. I would say, as far as reboot is kind of a loaded term. Reboot. Sometimes it's tough to know what a reboot really is. It's a sort of undefined term, and I think it's actually a lot of times it's sort of a misnomer because really it's just a remake. They call it a reboot, and they just don't want to use the word remake. I would say, as far as remake, I would not like to see a remake of this. I would like to see a remastered version of this with updated effects, but I want a straight sequel. I want a straight sequel to it. No reboot, no remake, no recasting, that kind of a thing. I would rather see just a straight sequel to it.
Yeah, I could hear in my head that don't call it a comeback. Krull's been here for years. I'll stop. What I could honestly see is just a series of novels that help flesh out the world and answer some of the questions as a lead-in to an actual just straight up legit sequel. That's what I would see. I mean, that's what I would love to be a part of, put it that way. So I think that'd be fun, because you don't have to discredit or throw away or do anything with the original film. You could revisit it and update portions of it that could use a little bit of love. But on the flip side too, I do think a series of novels that explore a lot of the things that aren't really answered, in the film, would be really interesting. Why is Francesca Annis's character at the center of the web? Why is that spider keeping her prisoner? There's a lot of questions that there was apparently a love story between the two of them, Freddie Jones's character and her, that apparently fell apart. There's a whole story there. And well, we know why she's there. She said that spoiler alert, she said that she'd killed their son or whatever, and that was sort of her penance. But why would a spider care that she killed their son? You know what I mean? I don't know. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot more there that needs to be explained, like how that exactly came to be, in my humble opinion. So, but no, yeah, I think it'd be interesting. And like I said, these suggestions over here, I'm down for all of them. I think they'd be fun. I think Krull would be something to be interesting to revisit. I think it'd be fun to do kind of this similar idea of doing a casting call idea. I think it'd be fun to do.
Let's leave that for the last word.
Okay.
Leave that for the last word.
But I do like the idea. Cool. All right. Are we good? We good to go to the outro?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Okay, cool. All right.
This has been a pretty long episode.
Yeah, it has.
It's not our record. I think our record was like 4 hours, but we're pretty close. So
yeah. So I want to thank you for hopefully watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, my name is Dave Beatty. I've been one of your hosts. If you're curious to see some of my art, learn more about me, you can do all of that and so much more at my website, which actually also serves as the official home of the Retro Rogues as well. That's at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. You can also get to the website actually by visiting just Retro Rogues. You could just go www.retrorogues.com, and it's www.retrorogues.com. Either one of those will take you to the website. You can watch some previous episodes. You can download, obviously, the first copy of the digital magazine, the Retro Rogues Fanzine, but also discover a lot of other things. And heck, if you want, you might even buy a sketch and help support all the crazy insanity we got going on here. That would be greatly appreciated as well. I want to thank Eric Alexander, my co-host here, for doing another amazing job here on the show, bringing all his interesting insights and observations, whether we're talking about streaming wars or pop culture, or just talking about some of these crazy shows and movies we like to watch. Please, Eric, tell the folks hopefully at home or wherever they're listening where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Well, I am most active on Twitter, and that is at BassGod14, BassGod14. My DMs are always open. There's been a lot of suggestions tonight. I am always open to those. So if you have a Twitter account, feel free to get a hold of me there. Also, I do my YouTube is also Base God 14, and the Twitch account. I'm sorry, not the Twitch. Yes, the Twitch account actually is Base God 14 as well. So you can always make comments on those platforms, and if you have suggestions, you have comments. Obviously, I'm always open to any suggestions you have or any insights you have. And also, as Dave mentioned, if you disagree on something, you're always welcome to chime in and say, well, I don't think you're right. I think that it's this way or that way. We're always open to that. But I did want to acknowledge James Stone's comments and say, here's an idea: retro films with current casting for a sequel series as something for the show. How about retro film series sequel current casting call, a la Wizard Magazine? Those are great suggestions, James. And with that, we will leave you with the last word.